The systematic barrier that traps the average professional in a state of intellectual obscurity is the exhausting misconception that being articulate requires a continuous stream of high-velocity verbal output. We live in a chaotic, hyper-communicative corporate and digital culture that conditions the individual to treat rapid speech, linguistic complexity, and sheer word volume as indicators of authority and intelligence. When an operator enters a high-stakes executive boardroom, a premium partnership negotiation, or a key media recording session, their underlying anxiety almost always triggers a high-volume broadcasting loop. They fill every structural pause with rapid, poorly calibrated sentences, stack unnecessary adjectives onto their core points, and rely on defensive filler words to frantically maintain their grip on the room's attention. This performative vocal flooding is an absolute strategic trap. The moment you rush your speech or over-explain your concepts, the primitive survival mechanisms of the people across from you instantly interpret your high-energy output as a hidden signal of internal status panic, strategic scarcity, and severe cognitive friction. To unlock a dangerous, commanding tier of interpersonal influence, you must execute a cold-blooded architectural inversion of your communication dynamics. You must completely stop trying to prove your intelligence through verbal abundance, replacing the frantic energy of over-explanation with the pristine, minimalist design of absolute lexical architecture. You do not speak to fill a room with sound. You use your voice as a high-precision instrument, engineered to slice through the ambient noise of the market with surgical clarity and unyielding structural weight. True articulation is never an expressive act of decorative vocabulary. It is the natural, effortless consequence of establishing total control over your vocal pace, your structural frameworks, and your internal emotional equilibrium. When you possess the absolute discipline to strip your speech of all linguistic waste, slow your delivery to a heavy, calculated cadence, and lean into the terrifying power of strategic pauses, you instantly transform your presence from a low-status applicant into an unassailable gravity well that the external environment must naturally listen to, respect, and accommodate. Chapter 1. The demolition of the verbal reflex. Establishing the measured cadence. The foundational vulnerability that compromises the authority and erases the magnetic clarity of the modern operator is the instinctual, deeply hardwired reflex to respond instantly to any incoming conversational stimulus. From the earliest stages of social conditioning, the individual is systematically trained to treat speech as a fast-paced game of kinetic tennis, where any sudden pocket of silence is viewed as an operational failure, a social embarrassment, or an admission of incompetence. When a professional walks into a high-pressure commercial mixer, an internal corporate review, or a premium client consultation, their nervous system automatically enters a state of hyper-vigilant readiness. The moment a question is thrown their way, or an adversary finishes an aggressive sentence, the operator's survival mechanism fires a command to their vocal cords to begin broadcasting immediately. They speak before their analytical center has finalized the architectural coordinates of the thought, resulting in a disorganized, tentative, and hyper-accelerated linguistic delivery that drops their perceived leverage to absolute zero. This instinctual rushing is a complete catastrophe for your sovereign positioning. The human brain is a highly sophisticated, predatory data processor that scans the vocal environment for subtle indicators of internal status, emotional composure, and cognitive stamina. The moment you accelerate your speech tempo to match the frantic energy of a room, or rush your sentences to prevent someone from interrupting you, you signal to every sharp observer in your orbit that you are operating from a state of chronic status scarcity. You betray a background fear that if you do not vomit all your data points into the terrain instantly, the room will lose interest, slide past your positioning, or expose your vulnerability. The crowd does not respect or remember the broadcaster who panics at the edge of a pause. They are drawn with near-religious intensity to the unhurried operator, the individual who possesses the supreme internal mass to stand independently in their own space, moving their tongue only when their mind has fully constructed an unbendable, structural law of information. To step into an elite tier of verbal dominance, you must execute a ruthless psychological demolition of the verbal reflex, establishing an unyielding linguistic baseline known as the measured cadence. This means you completely strip your nervous system of the requirement to match the timing or the frantic velocity of the people across from you. When someone speaks to you inside a high-stakes environment, you do not lean forward, you do not offer frantic verbal agreements mid-sentence, and you do not instantly open your mouth the millisecond they conclude their premise. You let your face remain a serene, unreadable mask of absolute, clinical attention and unbothered warmth. You sit comfortably back into your own skin, allowing a heavy, perfectly timed vacuum of silence to hang in the air for 1, 2, or 3 full seconds before you choose to utter a single word, forcing the external environment to experience the absolute weight of your composure before you choose to give them your value. This profound operational shift requires the continuous implementation of an internal script known as the temporal buffer protocol. Most people approach a high-pressure corporate exchange with a mind that is actively hyperventilating, preparing its next verbal counterstrike while the other person is still talking, which completely breaks their analytical focus and saturates their delivery with defensive filler phrasing. A dangerously articulate operator completely liquidates this internal friction. When someone addresses you, you drop your information overhead to absolute zero, allowing their words to land entirely within your analytical matrix, while you maintain absolute physical and structural stillness. You treat the pause after they finish speaking not as an awkward void to be rushed through, but as a sovereign buffer zone that belongs exclusively to your command. You use this space to clinically organize your core thoughts into a tight geometric architecture, ensuring that the first syllable that exits your mouth emerges with the absolute mass, clarity, and authority of a finished monument. When you operate from this pristine, measured cadence, your external verbal presentation undergoes a radical, quiet transformation that exerts a massive, almost hypnotic pull on the subconscious minds of everyone in your orbit. Because your nervous system is completely free of the frantic rush of self-doubt, your vocal delivery becomes entirely stripped of all low-status linguistic contaminants. You completely eliminate the use of tentative filler words, such as like, basically, or you know, which serve no purpose other than to signal to a sharp competitor that your tongue is moving faster than your brain can process data. Your voice emerges from the deep, resonant center of your chest, maintaining a flat, measured, and perfectly regulated verbal cadence that refuses to accelerate, even if the person across from you attempts to rush the timeline or interrupt your flow. This absolute economy of vocal force signals to the surrounding room that you possess an immense, unassailable reserve of internal power, transforming you into a stabilizing presence that people desperately want to anchor themselves to. Imagine a massive, high-velocity diesel cargo train rolling across a vast, empty prairie landscape at 3 km. The train does not enter a state of high-friction panic, crying because the surrounding wildlife is running around frantically, or accelerating its massive steel wheels to match the chaotic movement of the windstorms passing over the tracks. It does not navigate with frantic speed. It is engineered with hundreds of tons of solid iron mass, an unyielding engine block, and an immutable momentum that effortlessly glides across the iron rails at a fixed, heavy, and perfectly regulated velocity. The passing cars cannot alter its speed, the weather cannot shatter its trajectory, and the chaotic terrain cannot force its engine to skip a single rhythmic beat. The train doesn't chase the scenery. Its sheer, unyielding density and steady traction force the entire landscape to naturally, effortlessly accommodate its passage. Your commercial frameworks, your corporate consulting pitches, and your long-form media channels must be pushed through the human marketplace with that exact same train-locked momentum. Let me tell you about a man named Christian. Christian was an exceptionally sharp executive leadership coach and independent digital content strategist who spent his career engineering high-density organizational frameworks, workplace behavioral models, and narrative-driven educational scripts for elite international technology companies and venture funds in Silicon Valley. Christian was an absolute grandmaster of human behavioral systems, commanding a premium $50,000 flat strategy retainer for his custom operational interventions, visual assets, and channel layout optimizations. Despite his flawless technical competence, Early in his entrepreneurial path, Christian's firm hit a massive commercial bottleneck because his verbal delivery was heavily compromised by an accelerated, reactive communication script. Whenever he stepped into a boardroom to pitch his optimization arrays to the elite, predatory managing partners of global tech giants, his internal anxiety would trigger a high-velocity verbal reflex. He would speak at a frantic, high-pitched tempo, rushing his explanations to fit as much data as possible into the meeting timeline. He would constantly lean forward over his center of mass, interrupt his own sentences to pivot to new data points, and saturate his delivery with anxious filler words like and right to prevent the executives from looking away. The tech partners, sensing his underlying desperation and intense vulnerability to their timeline, systematically exploited his reactive verbal reflex. They would intentionally cut him off mid-sentence, criticize his implementation schedules as overly theoretical, and demand that he provide free preliminary workshops for months on end just to keep the conversation alive. Christian found himself trapped in a state of absolute strategic exhaustion, constantly over-explaining his value and rushing his delivery to win their temporary approval, while his independent enterprise remained completely stalled on the runway. One midnight, as he sat in his office, overlooking the dark, fog-swept grid of San Francisco, Christian experienced an absolute internal awakening. He looked at the flawless structural data of his leadership frameworks and realized that he was the massive cargo train begging transient corporate executives for permission to cross the tracks. He realized that his hurried verbal reflex was the literal open wound through which the market was draining his leverage and erasing his natural magnetism. Right then, Christian executed a total cold-blooded psychological demolition of his old communication models. He made a definitive, non-negotiable pact with his own nervous system. He would entirely eliminate all reactive verbal rushing, freeze his vocal tempo at a heavy measured cadence, and allow the market to accommodate his temporal buffer. 3 weeks later, Christian walked into the main executive boardroom of a multi-billion-dollar global cybersecurity conglomerate in San Jose for a high-stakes contract renewal session. The chief executive officer, a cold, notorious corporate tycoon named Vance, who had spent 30 years breaking outside consultancies through aggressive mind games, sudden corporate coldness, and calculated interruptions, leaned back in his leather chair, tossed Christian's premium proposal deck across the glass table, and launched a sharp opening strike. "Christian, we've reviewed your operational restructuring theories again. Frankly, your implementation timeline feels far too slow for the high-velocity environment we run here, and your $50,000 fee is unrealistic. We are prepared to offer you 40% of that number, and we require your team to provide round-the-clock maintenance support for free before we sign. Take it or leave it, but we need your answer right now." The old Christian would have instantly hyperventilated, leaned forward, and launched into a frantic, high-pitched defense of his pricing model. The new Christian did not move a single muscle. He sat back deeply and comfortably into his leather chair, his body completely loose and relaxed, his hands resting flat on his lap. His face remained a serene, unblinking mask of absolute finality and unbothered warmth. He let a slow, heavy vacuum of silence lock into the room for 4 full seconds, allowing the psychological tension to expand until the CEO's aggressive smirk began to freeze into a state of nervous confusion. When he finally chose to speak, his voice emerged from the deep center of his chest, maintaining an incredible, slow, and perfectly regulated verbal cadence that radiated pure sovereign authority and zero friction. "Vance, the implementation timeline and the $50,000 strategy retainer are fixed structural constants of my operation, engineered to preserve the velocity of our organizational arrays. They are finalized coordinates within my own enterprise, and they are not subject to external modification or transactional negotiation. If this conglomerate currently lacks the operational stamina to integrate our automated systems at this scale, I completely understand. I will leave the proposal on this glass table. You have until 5 p.m. today to wire the initial implementation capital under these exact specifications. At 5:01 p.m., this allocation window permanently closes, and I will route our processing capacity to our European pipeline. Thank you for your time." He did not offer a single extra explanation. He did not rely on a single filler word, and he did not speak another syllable to defend his worth. He simply sat back comfortably, interlocked his fingers, and let his absolute silence lock back into the room like an iron vault door. The sudden, total absence of the hurried verbal reflex from Christian completely upended the psychological gravity of the entire boardroom. By completely refusing to enter their argumentative loop, accelerate his tempo, or show a single micro-signal of hesitation, Christian's serene detachment forced the CEO's primitive survival mechanism to make an immediate, frantic calculation. They realized in a flash of raw panic that they were dealing with an elite sovereign operator who knew his frameworks were irreplaceable and was fully prepared to let their multi-billion-dollar conglomerate vanish from his timeline forever. Vance's confrontational, mocking facade completely evaporated into nothingness. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, cleared his throat nervously, and looked down at the contract deck. "Christian, look, there's no need to take our corporate due diligence so drastically. You are an exceptional class act and a phenomenal operator. We can absolutely accommodate your original $50,000 flat retainer fee and protect your structural implementation boundaries down to the exact letter. Let's execute the full contract framework right now." The original contract was signed and authorized within 10 minutes, completely free of any structural deductions. Christian had successfully transformed his absolute internal finality into complete verbal dominance, commanding the room simply by refusing to rush his tongue. The vital lesson Christian's architecture teaches is that true verbal clarity is never built by attempting to make your words attractive or fast for the room. It is built by exercising absolute, unyielding control over the timing of your own consciousness. The moment you step into the marketplace with a mind that has thoroughly liquidated the hurried verbal reflex and anchored its coordinates behind the wall of the measured cadence, you cease to be a supplicant begging for an allocation of attention. You become an unyielding force of nature, an absolute law of strategic geometry that the external environment must accommodate to survive. You stop defending your worth, you stop overthinking the ambient noise of human critique, and you stop allowing the volatile anxieties of external actors to alter your design trajectory. You step back into the pristine shadows of your own absolute self-sufficiency, allowing your individual empire to compound in the dark with permanent sovereignty, absolute speed, and total, unshakable freedom. Chapter 2: The Geometry of the Core Premise, Stripping Linguistic Overhead. The fundamental strategic error that cripples the articulate capacity of the average professional is the psychological compulsion to over-explain their thoughts. We operate within a loose, hyper-expressive cultural environment that trains the individual to treat linguistic complexity, decorative adjectives, and exhaustive historical preambles as indicators of deep intellectual depth. When an operator steps into a critical pitch meeting, an enterprise alignment session, or an intimate professional introduction, their underlying anxiety automatically triggers a high-volume data broadcasting loop. They tell themselves that to make an idea stick, or to prove their authority, they must continuously surround their core point with layers of background context, personal histories, and endless defensive qualifiers. They believe that this high-volume verbal cushioning makes their concepts look comprehensive, safe, and highly attractive to the people around them. This expressive broadcasting is an absolute strategic disaster for your clarity and leverage. The moment you step into an environment treating your mouth like an open information pipe, you instantly signal to the surrounding room that you are operating from a paradigm of chronic, underlying scarcity. True articulation operates on the strict laws of economic fluid dynamics. That which is rare is intensely valuable. That which is oversaturated is instantly devalued. When you flood a conversation with an endless stream of unrequested background descriptions and linguistic overhead, you strip your presence of all mystery, surrender your informational leverage, and provide the people across from you with the exact data points they need to categorize your status, map your insecurities, and dismiss your authority. The crowd does not gravitate toward the loudest, most descriptive broadcaster in the room. They gravitate with near-hypnotic curiosity toward the individual who possesses the absolute discipline to present their thoughts with the sharp geometric lines of a core premise. To unlock an elite tier of interpersonal power, you must master the architecture of the core premise, developing the clinical capacity to strip your communication of all unnecessary linguistic overhead. You must realize that true power in human affairs does not belong to the individual who controls the microphone for the longest duration. True power belongs entirely to the individual who can distill a massive, multivariable concept into a single, unyielding, and highly scannable monument of law. You completely stop wandering through long narrative paths, replacing that low-leverage habit with the cold, pristine design of absolute verbal minimalism. When you speak, you do not offer decorative introductions or soft qualifiers like, "I just wanted to say, in my humble opinion," or "correct me if I'm wrong." You state your thesis cleanly, drop it directly into the center of the room with absolute physical and structural finality, and immediately freeze your tongue, forcing the people around you to step forward and carry the intellectual weight of the conversation. This level of unyielding articulation requires the continuous execution of an interpersonal framework known as the structural distillation protocol. Most people approach a conversation with a mind that is actively generating disorganized fields of data, wandering from point to point without a clear destination, which forces the listener's brain to expend massive cognitive energy just to figure out the main point. A dangerously articulate operator completely eliminates this friction. Before you open your mouth to utter a word, you drop your personal information overhead to absolute zero, using your internal processing unit to run a savage background edit on your thoughts. You isolate the raw mathematical center of your message, strip away 90% of the descriptive adjectives and defensive qualifiers, and format the remaining 10% into a sharp, geometric sentence structure. When you release the thought into the arena, it lands with the undeniable force of an axiom, leaving zero room for misinterpretation, confusion, or debate. When you operate from this position of geometric minimalism, your external communication style becomes completely stripped of the standard submissive linguistic markers that plague the average corporate executive. You completely eliminate the habit of over-explaining your boundaries, your pricing models, or your creative designs to win back a nod of approval from the target's frame. If a client, a colleague, or a competitor challenges a metric inside your proposal deck, you do not launch into a multi-minute defensive lecture detailing your entire corporate history. You look them directly in the eyes with a face that is a serene, unreadable mask of clinical calm and unbothered warmth. Deliver a brief, high-density two-sentence core premise that cuts straight to the mechanical truth of the data, and let your absolute silence lock into the room like an absolute iron vault. This complete lack of verbal friction signals to their survival mechanisms that your concepts are not flexible opinions to be negotiated, but fixed laws of physics that they must naturally accommodate to remain accurate. Imagine an elite, world-class modern architect standing directly at the center of a historic, chaotic city square at 4 a.m., presenting a blueprint for a multi-million-dollar skyscraper monument. The architect does not pull out a box of cheap-colored crayons, running around the square frantically sketching thousands of loose, messy, decorative lines across the pavement, while praying that the passing crowds praise his creative energy or validate his artistic passion. He does not design with noise. He steps onto the terrain with a high-precision, heavy laser alignment tool, casting a single, piercing, and perfectly straight beam of pure emerald green light that slices through the dark sky with absolute mathematical alignment and structural geometric finality. His confidence is not an emotional feeling of excitement. It is the natural, unbendable byproduct of total containment, absolute mass, and his permanent capacity to establish a clean, structural baseline that remains completely independent of the ambient noise of the city. Your digital platforms, your premium consulting frameworks, and your long-term creative blueprints must be presented to the market with that exact same laser-locked geometry. Let me tell you about a woman named Vivienne. Vivienne was an exceptionally brilliant corporate restructuring consultant and independent digital content director who specialized in navigating high-stakes joint venture mergers, equity allocations, and structural turnarounds for elite international luxury media networks and venture-backed digital content empires. Vivienne was an absolute master of her craft, commanding a premium $50,000 flat advisory fee for her custom operational interventions, script formatting arrays, and custom thumbnail design matrices. Despite her flawless execution, early in her entrepreneurial path, Vivian's agency hit a massive operational bottleneck because her communication style was heavily compromised by a habit of linguistic over-explanation. Whenever she had to defend her restructuring blueprints before the cynical, high-status executive boards of global media networks, her internal anxiety would trigger an information broadcasting loop. She would flood her presentations with exhaustive historical data, walk through every single micrometric of her operational models, and use long, complex sentences saturated with corporate jargon to prove her competence. The media moguls, sensing her underlying requirement to prove her worth, systematically exploited her linguistic overhead. They would intentionally interrupt her long explanations, criticize her restructuring fee as excessive, and drag her meetings into hours of circular debate, leaving her premium enterprise completely stalled on the runway while they forced her to cut her margins. One midnight, as she sat in her New York office, looking at a massive, chaotic 300-slide presentation deck she had engineered for an upcoming pitch, Vivian experienced an absolute internal awakening. She looked at the raw data models and realized that her massive walls of text and endless verbal descriptions were the literal open doorway through which the market was draining her leverage and erasing her natural clarity. She realized that she was the Grand Master Architect, trying to color the square with crayons instead of casting a single laser beam of structural truth. Right then, Vivian executed a total, cold-blooded psychological demolition of her old communication models. She made a definitive, non-negotiable pact with her own consciousness. She would entirely eliminate all linguistic overhead, freeze her verbal delivery at the sharp geometry of the core premise, and allow the market to either align with her minimalist law or vanish from her horizon. 2 days later, Vivian walked into a private executive suite in Manhattan to pitch her high-velocity media restructuring array to the chief executive officer of a massive multi-billion subscriber digital entertainment conglomerate. The CEO, a powerful, highly arrogant media tycoon named Julian, who was notorious for breaking outside consultancies through aggressive mind games, sarcastic interruptions, and sudden corporate coldness, leaned back in his leather chair, interrupted Vivian's opening slide, and launched into a sweeping, condescending critique designed to force her to accept a 40% fee cut. "Vivian, I've skimmed your multi-chapter restructuring proposal, and frankly, it feels far too aggressive for our current channel networks. Your $50,000 fee is entirely unrealistic for an independent director. Why should this conglomerate give your agency a single minute of our timeline when we can just run a cheap internal test ourselves?" The junior consultants on Vivian's team instantly panicked, their faces turning pale as they leaned forward to scramble for their laptops to defend their data decks. Vivian did not flinch. She did not shift her posture. She did not click to a secondary slide, and she did not show a single micro-expression of defensive agitation. She sat in absolute, motionless composure for 4 full seconds after Julian finished speaking, letting her breath settle into a slow, rhythmic baseline. She looked him directly in the eyes with an expression of calm, unbothered warmth, her face a serene mask of clinical detachment, and spoke with an incredible, slow, and perfectly regulated verbal tempo that dropped her thoughts into the room like a granite monolith. "Julian, your current internal channel layout is experiencing a systemic 42% leakage in audience retention across your primary video platforms. My automated narrative restructuring array stops that leakage permanently, securing your market velocity for the next media cycle. The fee is fixed at $50,000, and the implementation coordinates are entirely non-negotiable. Let's pull up your raw retention metrics on the main monitor so we can verify if your internal team has the structural discipline required to integrate this solution." She did not offer a single presentation slide. She did not rely on a single filler word, and she did not speak another syllable to defend her worth. She simply sat back comfortably in her chair, interlocked her fingers, and let her absolute silence lock back into the room like an iron vault. The sudden, total absence of linguistic overhead from Vivian completely upended the psychological gravity of the entire executive suite. By completely refusing to enter his argumentative loop, over-explain her credentials, or show a single micro-signal of panic, Vivienne's geometric clarity forced the tycoon's primitive survival mechanism to make an immediate, frantic calculation. They realized in a flash of raw panic that they were not dealing with an eager vendor begging for an assignment, but with an elite sovereign operator who knew her technology was irreplaceable and was fully prepared to let their multi-billion subscriber conglomerate vanish from her timeline forever. Julian's confrontational, mocking facade completely dissolved into nothingness. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, cleared his throat nervously, and looked down at the raw retention metrics on his desk. "Vivienne, look, there's no need to take our corporate due diligence so drastically. You are an absolute class act and a phenomenal operator. We can absolutely accommodate your original $50,000 flat retainer fee and protect your structural implementation boundaries down to the exact letter. Let's sign the full contract framework right now." The original contract was executed and signed within 10 minutes, completely free of any structural deductions. Vivienne had successfully transformed her absolute internal finality into complete verbal dominance, commanding the room simply by stripping her speech down to the core premise. The definitive lesson Vivienne's strategy teaches is that true human clarity is never achieved by trying to build long, complex verbal bridges to the crowd. It is achieved by completely stripping away the linguistic waste until your remaining words stand as an unbendable wall of structural law. The moment you step into the marketplace with a mind that has thoroughly liquidated the compulsion to over-explain and fully anchored itself in the pristine architecture of the core premise, you possess an invisible, permanent leverage over every asset in your orbit. You stop chasing the room's validation, you stop overthinking the ambient noise of human critique, and you stop allowing the volatile anxieties of external actors to alter your design trajectory. You step back into the quiet shadows of your own absolute self-sufficiency, allowing your individual empire to compound in the dark, with permanent sovereignty, absolute speed, and total, unshakable freedom. Chapter 3: The Architecture of the Structural Pause, Weaponizing Strategic Silence. The critical psychological flaw that devalues the vocal authority of the modern professional is the instinctual fear of ambient silence. Within the frantic, hyper-communicative landscape of contemporary business, the individual is systematically conditioned to treat any gap in conversational output as an operational emergency. When an operator enters an executive briefing, a high-stakes client confrontation, or a premium enterprise pitch, their nervous system treats a pause like an unstable void that must be filled with immediate linguistic activity. The moment they conclude a sentence or encounter a skeptical glance from the target across the table, their underlying anxiety triggers a vocal flooding mechanism. They extend their vowels, introduce weak verbal linkages, or launch into unrequested secondary explanations just to keep the acoustic channel saturated. This frantic behavior is an absolute strategic disaster. The moment you rush to fill a pocket of silence, you signal to every sharp observer in your orbit that you are operating from a position of intense status anxiety and emotional fragility. To step into a supreme tier of verbal dominance, you must master the architecture of the structural pause, developing the clinical capacity to weaponize strategic silence as an instrument of psychological leverage. You must realize that true articulation is never measured by your ability to maintain a continuous stream of vocal audio. It is measured by your willingness to let silence stand as an unbendable wall of structural law. A dangerously confident operator does not fear the vacuum of a pause. You create it intentionally to force the external environment to settle around your center of gravity. You use silence to slow down the room's tempo, dismantle their practicing dominant scripts, and isolate your core statements so they land with the absolute weight of an axiom. When you possess the internal mass to drop a high-density premise into the center of the arena and let it hang there undisturbed by any defensive over-explanation, you force the target's primitive survival processor to experience the immense weight of your sovereignty. This unassailable stature requires the systematic execution of an interpersonal protocol known as acoustic vacuum isolation. Most people approach a high-pressure conversation with an anxious requirement to smooth over every point of friction, rushing to answer questions or clarify their meaning the millisecond they detect a hint of confusion or resistance from the listener. A sovereign operator completely liquidates this internal friction. When you deliver an important strategic insight, a premium pricing model, or a critical diagnostic boundary, you do not soften the blow with a trailing explanation or a nervous laugh. You conclude your final word cleanly, pull your breath down into your deep diaphragmatic center, and freeze your tongue in a state of absolute physical and structural finality. You let the silence expand into the room like a heavy psychological weight, completely unbothered by the ambient tension, forcing the people across from you to step forward, carry the cognitive load, and speak first to relieve the pressure. When you operate from this paradigm of structural silence, your external communication style becomes completely stripped of the standard low-status markers that compromise the authority of the average corporate director. You completely eliminate the use of trailing qualifiers, such as, "Does that make sense?" or "If you know what I mean," which serve no purpose other than to reveal to a sharp competitor that you are begging for their reassurance and validation. If an investor, a client, or a board member meets your statement with a cold, intimidating stare designed to rattle your composure, you do not break under the stress. You do not offer an unrequested concession or scramble to slide a secondary data model across the table. You look them directly in the eyes with a face that is a serene, unblinking mask of clinical calm and unbothered warmth, holding their gaze through the silence with an expression of detached curiosity until their defensive posture collapses under the weight of their own friction. Imagine an elite, world-class high-altitude stone watchtower positioned at the absolute epicenter of a fierce, wind-swept mountain pass at 3 a.m. The watchtower does not enter a state of high-friction panic, crying because the surrounding blizzards are howling through its granite arches, or attempting to wave its flags frantically to force the mountain windstorms to stop their aggressive movement. It does not navigate with expressive noise. It simply stands in a state of absolute, unyielding density, mass, and pristine silence, allowing the freezing winds to slam against its reinforced walls and exhaust their kinetic energy into the empty void of the valley. The storm cannot alter its structural position, the snow cannot warp its geometry, and the chaotic environment cannot force its foundation to shift by a single millimeter. The tower doesn't chase the weather. Its sheer, unyielding weight and quiet stance force the entire pass to naturally, effortlessly accommodate its presence. Your creative platforms, your enterprise consulting models, and your long-term digital media channels must be pushed through the human marketplace with that exact same watchtower lock density. Let me tell you about a man named Harrison. Harrison was an exceptionally sharp architectural design strategist who engineered automated spatial frameworks, script optimization models, and custom interior layouts for elite international boutique hotels and luxury resorts across Southeast Asia. Harrison was an absolute master of spatial geometry, commanding a premium $50,000 flat design retainer for his custom architectural interventions and brand layout optimizations. Despite his flawless technical genius, early in his entrepreneurial path, Harrison's firm hit a massive commercial bottleneck because his verbal delivery was heavily compromised by a fear of silence. Whenever he attended high-stakes hospitality summits in Bali or Singapore to secure new resort contracts, his nervous system would enter a state of hyperactive hunting panic. Whenever a senior vice president of an international hotel chain asked a question or fell silent while reviewing his portfolio, Harrison's internal anxiety would trigger a vocal flooding loop. He would instantly launch into long, frantic over-explanations of his visual layouts, fill every single micropause with rapid technical jargon, and offer sudden, unrequested discounts to prevent the corporate buyer from looking away. The hospitality executives, sensing his underlying scarcity and intense need for validation, consistently treated Harrison like a low-tier vendor. They would exploit his verbal panic to extract free design intelligence, demand endless revisions to his contracts, and drag his negotiations out for months without ever signing, leaving his premium enterprise completely stalled on the runway. One midnight, after a particularly exhausting networking mixer, where 3 major resort developers had completely walked away from his table mid-conversation because his presentation style felt overly desperate, Harrison experienced an absolute psychological paradigm shift. He walked out onto an empty beach, watched the massive, unmoving cliffs of the coast stand entirely undisturbed by the pounding waves of the ocean, and realized that his own frantic vocal flooding was the literal wall that was preventing his target audience from recognizing his elite status. He realized that his fear of silence was the exact mechanic that was devaluing his technology and erasing his natural magnetism. Right then, Harrison executed an absolute, cold-blooded liquidation of his old communication models. He made a definitive, non-negotiable pact with his own consciousness. He would entirely eliminate all trailing explanations, anchor his presence behind the wall of the structural pause, and allow the market to handle the weight of his silence. 6 months later, Harrison attended the premier luxury hospitality development summit in Hong Kong. He walked into the main executive boardroom to pitch a $100 million resort development project in Kyoto to a senior managing director named Takahashi, a brutal, old-school corporate autocrat who was notorious for breaking outside agencies by using intense staring matches, long tactical silences, and sudden displays of absolute corporate indifference. As Harrison concluded his brief, geometric opening presentation slide, Takahashi did not look up from his papers. He let his head remain lowered for 10 full seconds, intentionally allowing a heavy, freezing silence to settle over the boardroom like a physical weight to see if Harrison would break. The old Harrison would have instantly hyperventilated, leaned forward, and launched into a frantic over-explanation to salvage the atmosphere. The new Harrison did not move a single muscle. He sat back deeply and comfortably in his leather booth, his body completely loose and relaxed, his hands resting motionless on his lap. His face remained a serene, unreadable mask of absolute clinical calm and unbothered warmth. He held Takahashi's space in complete, unblinking stillness, weaponizing the structural pause and allowing the psychological vacuum to expand across the room for 15, 20, and 25 seconds without uttering a single syllable or shifting his posture. The absolute absence of vocal panic from Harrison completely shattered the tycoon's practicing dominance script. Finding no defensive friction or eager pleading to lock onto, Takahashi's corporate arrogance completely collapsed. He raised his head, put down his pen, and looked at Harrison with a profound, sudden baseline of deep intellectual respect. "Harrison, everyone who sits in that chair runs around frantically, trying to oversell me their templates to fix my silence. Yet you sit here as if you already own my entire hotel infrastructure. My internal design teams are currently stuck on the spatial geometry of the main pavilion in Kyoto. What is your methodology, and how does your framework solve our retention leakage?" Harrison did not smile eagerly, and he did not rush to pull up his design files. He leaned back comfortably, looked the billionaire director directly in the eyes with absolute clinical equality, and spoke with an incredible, slow, and perfectly regulated verbal cadence that radiated pure sovereign authority. "Takahashi, my enterprise designs the exact structural geometry that forces an international traveler to experience absolute psychological awe the moment they cross your perimeter. The fee is fixed at $50,000, and my implementation timeline is a non-negotiable parameter of my studio. We can authorize a formal spatial review inside my office next week to address your pavilion bottleneck, or we can close the file today. I will leave that choice entirely with your board." He delivered the premise cleanly, cut his voice off with absolute precision, and let the structural pause lock back into the room like an iron vault door. The tycoon put down his glass, leaned forward with a near-religious respect, and signed Harrison's premium contract on the spot with a steady hand, thanking Harrison for the privilege of securing his timeline. Harrison had successfully transformed his absolute internal finality into complete verbal dominance, commanding the room simply by refusing to move his tongue to save their comfort. The definitive lesson Harrison's strategy teaches is that true human clarity is never built by moving your voice toward the room. It is built by holding your ground through strategic silence until the room moves toward you. The moment you step into a professional or personal environment with a mind that has thoroughly liquidated the instinct to flood the terrain with noise and anchored its coordinates behind the wall of an unyielding structural pause, you cease to be an anxious candidate begging for alignment You become an absolute law of strategic geometry, a fixed epicenter of power that the external world must naturally seek out to find its own balance. You stop over-explaining your value, you stop chasing after the fleeting validation of human assets, and you stop allowing the high-energy noise of external environments to alter your designed coordinate, allowing your individual empire to compound in the dark with permanent sovereignty, absolute speed, and total, unshakable freedom. Chapter 4. The Resonance of Sovereignty, Calibrating Vocal Weight and Tone. The core systemic vulnerability that devalues the articulation of the modern operator is the subconscious habit of pitch elevation under corporate pressure. We operate within a loose, hyper-expressive cultural matrix that conditions the individual to link a high-pitched, enthusiastic, and forward-leaning vocal presentation with friendliness, high social intelligence, and cooperative utility. When an executive or digital strategist steps into a critical pitch meeting, a high-stakes interview, or an intimate personal introduction, their underlying nervous system automatically registers the target's high-status position as an environmental threat. To smooth over the tension and secure validation, their vocal cords instinctively tighten, forcing their vocal pitch to rise into a thin, head-toned register. They deliver their data models with an accelerated, eager verbal melody, inflecting upward at the end of their sentences, as if they are continuously begging the listener for permission, approval, and cognitive reassurance. This submissive vocal calibration is an absolute disaster for your strategic positioning and interpersonal magnetism. The human mind possesses an ancient evolutionary processor that is hardwired to analyze vocal resonance, tonal stability, and pitch deflection to instantly determine an individual's true place in the dominance hierarchy. The moment your voice shifts into a high-pitched defensive register, or your sentences conclude with an upward inflection, your target's primitive survival mechanism immediately registers the hidden friction of status panic and internal scarcity. They instinctively sense that you are attempting to please them to extract safety, attention, or revenue from their ecosystem to fill a void within your own operational matrix. Their perimeters immediately lock down, their responses become polite yet dismissive, and they quietly search for an exit coordinate, completely blind to your technical competence, because your voice has exposed your internal fragility. To unlock a dangerous supreme tier of interpersonal attraction, you must master the resonance of sovereignty, developing the clinical capacity to permanently calibrate your vocal weight and tone into an instrument of absolute authority. You must realize that a sovereign operator does not use their voice to entertain, appease, or dance for the room. You use your voice to broadcast a pristine, unbothered density that signals an immovable internal ecosystem. You consciously pull your vocal projection away from the thin, frantic register of the throat and mouth, anchoring its mechanics deep within the resonant center of your chest and diaphragm. You speak with a flat, downward inflecting verbal melody, treating your words as highly valuable enterprise assets that are issued with permanent finality. The moment you drop the pitch of your voice into a heavy, unhurried, and perfectly regulated tone, you completely neutralize their capacity to intimidate or diminish your presence, forcing the entire terrain to drop into a state of quiet compliance to catch your frequency. This level of unyielding confidence is achieved through an internal operational framework known as the low-frequency anchoring protocol. Most people treat their voice as a transient satellite orbiting the emotional fluctuations of the environment, constantly lifting their pitch, laughing nervously, or accelerating their tempo to match the high-energy noise of passing groups. A sovereign operator completely inverts this dynamic. When you step into an arena, you choose a low, rich, and perfectly centered vocal register and anchor your entire consciousness into that specific tone with total finality. You speak with a heavy, downward deflection at the conclusion of every strategic premise, ensuring that your sentences land with the definitive finality of a closing statement, rather than the anxious pleading of a question. You do not shout to command attention, and you do not use aggressive, high-volume theatrics to dominate the conversation. You speak with a quiet, unbothered vocal mass that forces the room to completely silence its internal static just to decode your positioning. When you execute this inversion, you completely upend the psychological leverage of the interaction, inducing a state of intense cognitive dissonance within the target's nervous system. High-status actors, corporate tyrants, and social gatekeepers operate on the explicit expectation of submissive, high-pitched feedback. Their primitive minds require you to act like an anxious applicant to complete their practice dominance routine. However, when you meet their environmental pressure with a slow, heavy, and resonant vocal tone that remains completely independent of their presence, asking calm, probing questions with a pristine downward inflection, you completely shatter their dominant script. They realize in a flash of raw survival instinct that they are no longer dealing with a desperate vendor trying to impress them, but with an elite peer of immense structural power. Finding no defensive wall to slam into, their arrogance completely collapses, forcing their ego to immediately retreat into a state of intense confusion, deference, and a desperate desire to win your validation. Imagine a massive, high-powered nuclear aircraft carrier navigating through a chaotic, shallow harbor reef at 4 a.m. The carrier does not flash high-pitched, frantic warning lights to beg the surrounding civilian tugboats, low-leverage fishing vessels, or transient yachts for permission to cross the channel, nor does it adjust its internal engine alignment to please the shifting surface waves of the port. It does not navigate with expressive panic. It simply operates with a massive, multi-ton structural hull and a deep, low-frequency diesel propulsion array that emits a heavy, rhythmic, and unyielding sub-bass rumble that vibrates through the bedrock of the entire harbor infrastructure. The small vessels do not look down on the carrier. Their entire navigational trajectory is naturally, effortlessly drawn into a state of absolute compliance by the sheer, unbendable geometry of its mass and tonal density. Your business alignments, your corporate consultancies, and your daily social interactions must be anchored into the marketplace with that exact same low-frequency resonance. Let me tell you about a woman named Serena. Serena was an exceptionally brilliant media production strategist and independent digital content director who spent her career developing complex, multi-chapter narrative documentaries and long-form educational media platforms for elite technology founders and corporate wellness empires. Serena was an absolute master of digital branding, commanding a premium $50,000 flat strategy retainer for her custom structural interventions, layout designs, and custom thumbnail aspect ratios. Despite her flawless technical and narrative competence, Serena's commercial expansion hit a massive, terrifying bottleneck when she was brought in to pitch a sweeping, long-form content restructuring program to the senior leadership board of a multi-billion-dollar international corporate wellness network in Chicago. The network's executive committee was commanded by a senior vice president named Reginald, a brutal, old-school corporate autocrat who had spent 30 years ruling the digital marketing sector through intense psychological terror, aggressive public humiliations, and a calculated display of overwhelming institutional power. Reginald's office was an absolute cathedral of intimidation, a vast, top-floor suite filled with historic corporate trophies, flanked by silent, hyper-formal executive assistants, and designed so that visitors had to sit in low, deep leather chairs, while Reginald loomed over them from an elevated mahogany desk. Reginald had successfully forced dozens of outside media agencies to accept massive fee cuts and humiliating operational terms through sheer environmental and psychological pressure, treating every outside strategist like a low-status servant begging for a corporate crumb. The morning of the high-stakes pitch, as Serena sat in the low leather chair, Reginald immediately launched into his practice dominance routine. He did not look up from his papers for 2 full minutes, allowing the silence to hang in the room like a heavy weight. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were narrowed into a cold, contemptuous glare. He leaned back, slammed Serena's premium proposal deck onto his desk, and spoke in a deep, booming voice, designed to rattle her composure. "Serena, I've skimmed your multi-chapter narrative restructuring models, and frankly, I find your digital formatting theories to be an absolute insult to the 30 years of marketing excellence this division has built. You are an independent creator running around with online scripts, trying to tell a multi-billion-dollar global giant how to speak to its audience. Why should I give you a single dollar of our capital instead of throwing your team out of this building right now?" The junior associates from Serena's team instantly froze, their vocal cords tightening as they prepared to open their laptops and offer a high-pitched, frantic defense of their data models. Serena did not move an inch. She did not tighten her jaw. Her facial muscles remained a serene, unreadable mask of absolute calm, and she did not show a single microsignal of defensive agitation. She sat in total stillness for 4 full seconds, looking at Reginald not with fear or submissive reverence, but with the quiet, detached curiosity of an expert jeweler evaluating a flawed stone. When she opened her mouth, her voice emerged from the absolute deep center of her diaphragm, low, rich, and perfectly stabilized with a heavy downward inflection that completely neutralized the low seating arrangement, radiating pure sovereign authority and zero vocal friction. Reginald, your commitment to the legacy marketing models is precisely what preserved this infrastructure during the previous media cycle. It's an exceptional achievement, but the raw data across your digital channels demonstrates that your current allocation matrix is generating a systemic 42% leakage in audience retention across your primary video platforms. You do not need to lift the pitch of this meeting to preserve your legacy timeline. My enterprise compounds independently. The real question I am auditing today is whether this executive committee possesses the operational stamina and the structural discipline required to integrate our automated narrative arrays without retreating into old, low-velocity defensive habits. Let's bypass the theatrical framing and pull up your raw retention metrics on the main monitor so I can see if your team is actually capable of executing at this scale. The psychological effect of this clean, resonant vocal deconstruction hit the corporate tyrant like an absolute physical impact. By completely refusing to play the role of the anxious applicant, lift her vocal pitch, or introduce an upward inflection into her delivery, Serena's serene, low-frequency certainty forced the tycoon's primitive survival mechanism to recognize her as an elite peer of immense structural power. The aggressive scowl completely dissolved from his face. He put down his pen, shifted uncomfortably in his elevated chair, and looked at Serena with a profound, sudden baseline of deep intellectual respect and defensive compliance. All right, Serena, let's look at the retention metrics. Show me the automated narrative array. For the next 2 hours, the legendary corporate tyrant sat in absolute quiet compliance as Serena systematically dismantled their legacy media framework, signing Serena's premium $50,000 flat strategy contract at the end of the session with a steady hand and a profound, near-religious respect for her unshakable authority. The definitive lesson Serena's architecture teaches is that dangerous confidence is never achieved by trying to make your voice loud or aggressive for the market's approval. It is achieved by completely refusing to validate their right to alter your vocal frequency. The moment you step into an environment with a mind that has thoroughly liquidated the illusion of the high-pitched applicant and anchored itself in the absolute truth of the resonant chest register, your presence becomes entirely untouchable. You stop overthinking the opinions of gatekeepers, you stop lifting your tone to appease high-status architecture, and you stop allowing the aggressive posturing of external assets to drift your vocal alignment. You become a sovereign diagnostic lens, allowing your individual empire to compound in the dark with absolute speed, total precision, and permanent, unshakable freedom. Chapter 5. The Taxonomy of Linguistic Precision, Eradicating Narrative Bleed. The structural trap that consistently dilutes the conversational velocity of the modern professional is the chaotic phenomenon of narrative bleed. Within the highly fragmented, fast-paced environments of contemporary commerce, the average individual mistakenly equates a state of continuous linguistic movement with deep intellectual competence. When an operator steps into a critical venture review, an enterprise alignment session, or a digital media branding consult, their underlying status anxiety automatically triggers a high-volume decorative broadcast loop. To protect their ego from the perceived danger of an unresolved query or an unverified metric, they surround their core insights with an endless sequence of historical anecdotes, redundant synonyms, and defensive descriptions. They construct dense, text-heavy conceptual mazes that run in continuous, circular paths, hoping that this defensive screen of verbal volume will distract the listener from any potential gaps in their strategy. This linguistic overcrowding is an absolute tactical disaster for your professional leverage. The human brain is hardwired to evaluate the stability, clarity, and authority of its peers by observing the precision, efficiency, and economy of their communicative output. The moment you clutter a high-stakes corporate exchange with a series of unstructured narrative tangents or historical side notes, you signal to every sharp observer in your orbit that your internal database is unorganized and your thoughts are highly unstable. You betray an underlying fear that your core message is not dense enough or valuable enough to stand independently on its own merits, forcing you to prop it up with an exhausting display of conversational labor. The market does not respect the loud broadcaster who buries their thesis under a wall of verbal static. It gravitates with absolute clarity toward the elite operator who possesses the discipline to isolate their thoughts into tight, geometric laws of language. To claim an elite tier of verbal magnetism, you must master the taxonomy of linguistic precision, developing the clinical capacity to systematically liquidate all narrative bleed from your interactive timeline. You must realize that the ultimate expression of dangerous articulation is never conversational abundance. It is a clean, hyper-targeted linguistic design that delivers maximum cognitive impact with absolute minimal expenditure of vocal force. You completely stop wandering through long descriptive paths, replacing that low-leverage reflex with a cold, minimalist approach to lexical selection. When you speak, you do not use multiple adjectives where a single precise noun can carry the entire structural load. You state your mechanical conclusion with a clean, scannable verbal design, drop it directly into the center of the arena with permanent finality, and instantly freeze your tongue, forcing the people across the table to step forward and carry the intellectual weight of the discussion. This unassailable stature requires the continuous execution of an internal operational script known as the lexical distillation protocol. Most people approach an important corporate exchange with a mind that is actively generating disorganized fields of data, wandering from point to point without a clear destination, which forces the listener's brain to expend massive cognitive energy just to figure out the main point. A dangerously articulate operator completely eliminates this friction. Before you open your mouth to utter a word, you drop your personal information overhead to absolute zero, using your internal processing unit to run a savage background edit on your thoughts. You isolate the raw mathematical center of your message, strip away 90% of the descriptive adjectives and defensive qualifiers, and format the remaining 10% into a sharp, geometric sentence structure. When you release the thought into the arena, it lands with the undeniable force of an axiom, leaving zero room for misinterpretation, confusion, or debate. When you operate from this position of linguistic precision, your external communication style becomes completely stripped of the standard submissive markers that plague the average corporate executive. You completely eliminate the use of tentative filler words and vague corporate catchphrases, such as synergy, pivot, moving parts, or, at the end of the day, which serve no purpose other than to reveal to a sharp competitor that your mind is relying on pre-packaged cultural templates to mask a lack of structural depth. If an investor, a client, or a board member challenges a metric inside your proposal deck, you do not launch into a multi-minute defensive lecture detailing your entire corporate history. You look them directly in the eyes with a face that is a serene, unreadable mask of clinical calm and unbothered warmth. Deliver a brief, high-density two-sentence core premise that cuts straight to the mechanical truth of the data, and let your absolute silence lock into the room like an absolute iron vault. Imagine an elite, state-of-the-art laboratory laser cutting system operating inside a high-security microchip manufacturing facility at 3 a.m. The laser array does not enter a state of high-friction panic, crying because the raw silicon wafers passing beneath its lenses are dense, imperfect, or highly complex, nor does it attempt to blast the entire surface of the factory floor with a wide, messy cloud of uncontrolled heat to prove its power. It does not operate with noise. It channels its massive, high-voltage electrical energy through a perfectly calibrated ruby crystal matrix, focusing its entire physical force into a single, piercing and subatomic beam of pure emerald light, that cuts through the raw material with absolute mathematical precision and structural finality. Its confidence is not an emotional feeling of excitement, it is the natural, unyielding byproduct of total containment, absolute mass, and its permanent capacity to establish a clean, structural baseline that remains completely independent of the ambient chaos of the factory. Your digital platforms, your premium consulting frameworks, and your long-term creative blueprints must be presented to the market with that exact same laser-locked precision. Let me tell you about a man named Julian. Julian was an exceptionally sharp digital systems architect and narrative content strategist who engineered automated monetization layouts, multi-chapter script optimization grids, and custom high-contrast visual channel frameworks for elite educational documentary creators and multi-million subscriber media platforms across Europe. Julian was an undisputed grandmaster of digital asset optimization, commanding a premium $50,000 flat strategy retainer for his custom operational interventions, thumbnail dimension blueprints, and brand assets. Despite his flawless technical genius, early in his commercial trajectory, Julian's consulting firm hit a massive, exhausting bottleneck because his verbal delivery was heavily compromised by a chronic habit of narrative bleed. Whenever he stepped into a boardroom to pitch his optimization arrays to the elite managing partners of international tech funds, his internal anxiety would trigger an information broadcasting loop. He would flood his explanations with exhaustive background context, walk through every single micrometric of his operational models, and use long, complex sentences saturated with corporate jargon to prove his competence. The media moguls, sensing his underlying requirement to prove his worth, systematically exploited his linguistic overhead. They would intentionally interrupt his long explanations, criticize his optimization fee as excessive, and drag his meetings into hours of circular debate, leaving his premium enterprise completely stalled on the runway while they forced him to cut his margins. One midnight, after a particularly exhausting corporate integration session where a major artificial intelligence founder had completely rejected his workplace optimization blueprint because his presentation style felt confrontational and confusing, Julian experienced an absolute internal paradigm shift. He sat in his creative studio, looked at his flawless structural blueprints on his monitors, and realized that his own habit of narrative bleed was the literal open doorway through which the market was draining his leverage and erasing his natural clarity. He realized he was the laboratory laser system trying to color the silicon wafer with cheap colored crayons, instead of casting a single beam of subatomic light. Right then, Julian executed a total, permanent liquidation of his old communication models. He made an unbendable, non-negotiable pact with his own consciousness. He would entirely eliminate all linguistic overhead, freeze his verbal delivery at the sharp geometry of the core premise, and allow the market to either align with his minimalist law or vanish from his horizon. 3 months later, Julian was brought in to pitch a comprehensive, multi-chapter executive leadership alignment program to the board of directors of a massive, hyper-competitive cybersecurity conglomerate in San Jose. The firm's executive suite was notorious for its intense, high-stress corporate warfare, led by a chief executive officer named Vance, a brilliant, cold-blooded tech tycoon who prided himself on intimidating outside strategists into emotional compliance by using intense staring matches, sarcastic interruptions, and a calculated display of absolute corporate indifference. As Julian stepped into the boardroom, Vance did not look up from his phone, allowing a heavy, freezing silence to settle over the room. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were cold, and he launched into a sharp, dismissive opening strike. "Julian, I've looked at your leadership script concepts, and frankly, I find your behavioral frameworks to be a bit too soft for the high-velocity environment we run here. We don't have time for emotional alignment theories. Why should I give your firm a single minute of our executive timeline when my division is built on raw corporate metrics?" The old Julian would have instantly frozen his posture, tightened his jaw, and launched into a sharp, high-friction defense of his credentials. The new Julian did not move a single muscle to defend himself. He sat back comfortably in his leather chair, his body completely loose and relaxed, and allowed a slow, genuine smile of absolute warmth to spread across his face. His eyes shone with a serene, unbothered benevolence. He looked at Vance not with anger or submissive panic, but with the inviting, detached warmth of a father watching a child play a game. He waited for 2 full seconds after Vance finished speaking, and then spoke with a slow, rich, and perfectly regulated verbal tempo that radiated pure geothermal safety and clean linguistic precision. Vance, your dedication to raw corporate metrics is precisely why this enterprise has successfully dominated the cybersecurity sector for the past decade. It's an exceptional achievement, but the operational data across your division confirms that your high-stress environment is currently generating a systemic 35% leakage in executive retention across your primary engineering teams. You do not need to fight my frameworks to protect your metrics. My enterprise compounds independently. The optimization array I am introducing today is designed to take the brutal friction off your executive timeline, allowing your leaders to execute at maximum velocity without burning out. Let's look at the raw retention metrics together so I can show you exactly how we stabilize that leakage. The psychological impact of this clean, radiant deconstruction hit the tech tycoon like a profound wave of cognitive dissonance. By completely refusing to mirror his hostility, match his coldness, or retreat into submissive pleading, Julian's serene, unbothered warmth and absolute linguistic precision stripped Vance of his entire adversarial leverage. Vance realized in an instant that his practiced intimidation machinery had zero capacity to dent Julian's internal equilibrium. Finding no defensive friction to lock onto, Vance's cold facade completely dissolved. He let out a slow breath, leaned forward with a deep baseline of sudden respect, and smiled back. "All right, Julian, let's look at the retention numbers. Show me your optimization array." The original $50,000 contract was signed at the end of the session, and Vance spent the next year treating Julian as an indispensable strategic ally. Julian had successfully transformed his absolute internal finality into supreme social radiance, commanding the room simply by refusing to be cold or cluttered. The definitive lesson Julian's framework teaches is that dangerous confidence is never achieved by trying to control the emotional outputs of your opponents. It is achieved by exercising absolute, unyielding control over the perimeters of your own consciousness. The moment you step into the marketplace with a mind that has thoroughly liquidated social compliance and anchored its coordinates behind a perfectly calibrated non-reactive mask and a sharp linguistic taxonomy, you become entirely untouchable. You stop overthinking the volatile noise of human critique, you stop defending your pride with friction, and you stop allowing the aggressive posturing of external assets to alter your designed coordinate. You become a sovereign, clinical diagnostic lens, allowing your individual empire to compound in the dark with absolute speed, total precision, and permanent, unshakable freedom. Chapter 6: The Spatial Geography of Thought, Framing Through Structural Anchors. The fundamental strategic error that cripples the articulate capacity of the average professional is the psychological inability to control the structural orientation of their concepts. Within the loose, hyper-expressive cultural environment that dominates modern organizational life, the individual is systematically trained to process communication as a fluid stream of emotional consciousness. When an operator steps into a critical pitch meeting, an enterprise alignment session, or an intimate professional introduction, their underlying anxiety automatically triggers a high-volume narrative broadcast loop. They introduce their ideas as a single, massive block of undifferentiated text, blending data points, personal interpretations, and strategic recommendations into a chaotic linguistic soup. They believe that by providing this continuous stream of information, they will appear deep, comprehensive, and highly valuable to the people around them. This unstructured communication approach is an absolute catastrophe for your clarity, leverage, and authority. The human mind is an expert pattern recognition mechanism that continuously evaluates the stability, efficiency, and structural mass of the leaders and operators in its environment. The moment you present an idea without distinct geometric borders or clear structural boundaries, you force the listener's brain to expend massive cognitive energy just to figure out the primary divisions of your thought. They instinctively interpret this lack of organization as a direct reflection of a cluttered, anxious, and low-leverage mind, leading them to quickly categorize your status as a low-tier tactician and dismiss your authority. The crowd does not move toward the individual who floods the room with a chaotic stream of information. They are drawn with absolute, near-hypnotic reverence toward the sovereign operator who maps the terrain of thought into distinct, unyielding structural anchors. To claim an elite tier of verbal dominance, you must master the spatial geography of thought, developing the clinical capacity to frame your concepts with absolute structural boundaries before you choose to release them into the terrain. You must realize that true power in human affairs belongs entirely to the individual who can organize a complex, multivariable strategic universe into a tight, highly scannable grid of objective law. You completely stop wandering through loose narrative paths, replacing that low-leverage reflex with an advanced architectural method known as conceptual modularity. When you speak, you do not let your sentences run together into an open-ended block of text. You announce the precise geometric layout of your thought at the very beginning of your statement, establish distinct structural anchors to hold the perimeter, and deliver each module with the clean, unhurried finality of an independent monument, forcing the environment to adjust around your map. This level of unyielding articulation requires the continuous execution of an internal operational script, known as the category delineation framework. Most people approach a high-pressure corporate exchange with an anxious requirement to respond instantly to any incoming conversational stimulus, speaking before their analytical center has finalized the architectural boundaries of the thought. A dangerously articulate operator completely eliminates this friction. Before you open your mouth to utter a word, you use your internal processing unit to run a savage structural sort on your thoughts. You divide your core message into a precise, limited matrix of primary operational pillars, completely eliminating all irrelevant historical side notes and descriptive clutter. When you release the thought into the arena, you frame it cleanly, saying, "There are two specific structural anomalies we must isolate right now." By providing these hard geometric borders, you instantly capture the room's attention, place the target's nervous system into a state of deep cognitive security, and establish an absolute command over the interaction timeline. When you operate from this paradigm of spatial geography, your external communication style becomes completely stripped of the standard submissive linguistic markers that plague the average corporate executive. You completely eliminate the habit of trailing off at the end of your points, or jumping erratically from category to category to win back a nod of approval from the target's frame. If a client, a colleague, or a competitor challenges a metric inside your proposal deck, you do not launch into a multi-minute defensive lecture detailing your entire corporate history. You look them directly in the eyes with a face that is a serene, unreadable mask of clinical calm and unbothered warmth. Deliver a brief, high-density structural premise that maps their objection into a specific category of error, and let your absolute silence lock back into the room like an iron vault. This complete lack of verbal friction signals to their survival mechanisms that your concepts are not flexible opinions to be negotiated, but fixed laws of geometry that they must naturally accommodate to remain accurate. Imagine an elite, world-class modern city planner standing directly at the center of a historic, chaotic urban square at 4 a.m., presenting a master plan for a massive, multi-million-dollar structural monument. The city planner does not pull out a box of cheap-colored crayons, running around the square frantically sketching thousands of loose, messy, decorative lines across the pavement, while praying that the passing crowds praise his creative energy or validate his artistic passion. He does not design with noise. He steps onto the terrain with a high-precision, heavy laser alignment tool, casting a clean grid of sharp emerald green beams that divide the entire chaotic space into distinct, perfectly aligned zones of absolute structural finality. His confidence is not an emotional feeling of excitement. It is the natural, unbendable byproduct of total containment, absolute mass, and his permanent capacity to establish a clean, structural baseline that remains completely independent of the ambient noise of the city. Your digital platforms, your premium consulting frameworks, and your long-term creative blueprints must be presented to the market with that exact same laser-locked geometry. Let me tell you about a woman named Maya. Maya was an exceptionally brilliant independent digital media architect and workplace strategist who specialized in designing high-velocity corporate communication infrastructures, narrative workflows, and media layout designs for elite venture funds and international logistics empires across North America. Maya was an undisputed master of structural engineering, commanding a premium $50,000 flat strategy retainer for her custom organizational interventions, visual assets, and channel layout optimizations. Despite her flawless technical competence, early in her corporate path, Maya's commercial expansion hit a massive bottleneck because her communication style was heavily compromised by an unstructured, open-ended narrative script. Whenever a client panicked over a shifting market metric or a board member criticized an implementation timeline, Maya's nervous system would instantly enter a state of fight-or-flight agitation, driving her to spend hours over-explaining her data models, jumping erratically from point to point, and offering frantic, unrequested concessions to restore their comfort. The corporate clients, sensing her underlying reactivity and intense vulnerability to environmental stress, consistently used her unstructured reflex to exploit her agency. They would intentionally trigger false crises, demand sudden weekend alterations to her media layouts without compensation, and delay her contract renewals to force her to accept lower profit margins. Maya found herself trapped in a state of absolute strategic exhaustion, constantly running around trying to put out emotional fires for volatile executives, while her independent enterprise remained completely stalled on the runway. One midnight, after discovering that a senior vice president of a global logistics firm had completely cancelled an optimization rollout because Maya had looked rattled and disorganized during a tense quarterly board review, Maya experienced an absolute internal awakening. She sat in her creative studio, looked at her flawless structural blueprints on her monitors, and realized that her own unstructured communication style was the literal open doorway through which the market was draining her leverage and erasing her magnetism. She realized she was the city planner trying to argue with the crowd, instead of casting a sharp geometric grid over the square. Right then, Maya executed a total, permanent liquidation of her old communication patterns. She made an unbendable, non-negotiable pact with her own consciousness. She would entirely eliminate all loose narrative streams, freeze her internal processing unit at a state of absolute finality, and meet the volatile noise of the marketplace with a perfectly calibrated spatial geometry of thought. 6 months later, Maya was brought in to execute a massive, high-stakes operational restructuring program for a legacy international transport empire in Detroit that was suffering from systemic financial compression. The company's procurement division was commanded by a senior director named Sterling, a loud, highly confrontational corporate autocrat who had spent 40 years ruling the manufacturing sector through intense psychological terror, aggressive public humiliations, and a calculated display of overwhelming emotional pressure to break outside vendors. Sterling was determined to publicly humiliate Maya during an all-hands executive summit, preparing a fierce, meticulously calculated verbal assault designed to shatter her authority in front of the entire international leadership team. During the summit, as Maya stood at the main podium outlining the restructuring timeline to 300 silent executives, Sterling suddenly stood up in the center of the auditorium, slammed his heavy folder down on his seat, and intercepted the presentation. He shouted through a wireless microphone that Maya was an inexperienced outsider whose digital data models were an absolute fraud, that her media layout strategies were a waste of corporate capital, and that her optimization plan would directly cause an operational failure that would ruin the company's reputation forever. The entire ballroom dropped into a freezing, terrifying silence. Every vice president and board member sat paralyzed, turning their heads to watch Maya, fully expecting her to instantly flush with anger, drop her notes, or deploy her corporate authority to launch into a frantic, high-friction defense of her data models. Maya stood at the podium in absolute, unbothered composure. She did not tighten her jaw, she did not shift her weight from the podium, and her hands rested completely motionless on the glass surface. Her face remained a pristine, unreadable mask of absolute, frozen calm. She stood in absolute, motionless silence for 5 full seconds after Sterling finished his tirade, letting the echo of the aggressive shouts fade completely into the vast room until the air felt heavy with awkward psychological tension. She did not allow a single micro-signal of defensive agitation or emotional reactivity to touch her conscious processor. She looked directly at Sterling, not with fear or anger, but with the quiet, detached curiosity of an expert physician evaluating a temporary symptom. Then, she nodded slowly, her eyes shining with a genuine, unyielding warmth, and spoke with an incredible, slow, and perfectly regulated verbal cadence that radiated absolute, unbothered sovereignty and perfect structural anchors. Sterling, your raw critique isolates exactly two distinct categories of structural risk that this board must evaluate right now. The first category is operational transit latency across your primary manufacturing corridors. The second category is automated capital allocation metrics across our digital layouts. Let's isolate the first category on the main screen immediately so we can verify why our high-velocity tracking software permanently neutralizes your traditional latency bottlenecks. The psychological effect on Sterling was devastating. By completely absorbing his raw anger, refusing to offer a single reactive microsignal, and seamlessly framing his venomous attack into a tight, two-part structural grid of neutral operational data, Maya had instantly stripped him of his entire adversarial platform. Sterling could no longer play the role of the brave corporate titan breaking a weak contractor. If he continued to shout now, he would simply look like an irrational, emotionally unstable child, disrupting a collaborative engineering session. The psychological vertigo hit his nervous system instantly. His face turned bright red, his aggressive posture completely collapsed, and he sat back down in his chair, staring blankly at his desk in absolute silence. For the rest of the summit, Maya proceeded to walk through her restructuring cuts with absolute precision, while Sterling sat entirely neutralized, nodding along like a quiet student. Maya had successfully turned a public execution attempt into the ultimate demonstration of her untouchable, non-reactive command, becoming an absolute magnet for the board's respect, simply by refusing to react to the noise or stray from her structural map. The definitive lesson Maya's framework teaches is that dangerous confidence is never achieved by trying to control the emotional outputs of your opponents. It is achieved by exercising absolute, unyielding control over the structural perimeters of your own mind. The moment you step into the marketplace with a mind that has thoroughly liquidated social compliance and anchored its coordinates behind a perfectly calibrated structural frame, you become entirely untouchable. You stop overthinking the volatile noise of human critique, you stop defending your pride with friction, and you stop allowing the aggressive posturing of external assets to alter your designed coordinate. You become a sovereign, clinical diagnostic lens, allowing your individual empire to compound in the dark with absolute speed, total precision, and permanent, unshakable freedom. Chapter 7. The Lexical Ballast, Eradicating Qualifier Friction. The invisible leak that quietly drains the personal authority and dilutes the strategic impact of the modern professional is the systematic reliance on conversational qualifiers. We operate within a highly collaborative, hyper-polite corporate landscape that subtly trains the individual to soften their assertions, to avoid any potential environmental friction or egoic conflict. When an operator steps into a critical project alignment, a premium vendor review, or a high-stakes board presentation, their underlying status anxiety automatically activates a linguistic cushioning program. Before they deliver a definitive data point or a non-negotiable strategic boundary, they instinctively prefix their statement with soft, apologetic phrases. They say, "I just wanted to suggest, in my opinion, I could be wrong, but," or, "Does that make sense?" They believe that by wrapping their ideas in this protective layer of submissive humility, they will appear collaborative, accessible, and safe to the people around them. This linguistic cushioning is an absolute catastrophe for your professional leverage and interactive clarity. The human mind possesses an ancient evolutionary processor that continuously scans its environment for subtle indicators of internal certainty, emotional mass, and structural dominance. The moment you introduce a qualifier into your speech, your listener's subconscious mechanism immediately registers a signal of internal status panic, self-doubt, and cognitive fragility. They perceive that you are checking their face for validation, begging for their permission to speak, and attempting to build an emergency escape hatch in case your idea is challenged. You reveal that you are intensely vulnerable to their disapproval, which instantly invites a sharp competitor or a cynical client to step straight through your porous perimeter, cut your profit margins, and dismiss your authority. The market does not respect the anxious operator who apologizes for their own intelligence. It gravitates with absolute reverence toward the sovereign commander who delivers their concepts with the unyielding mass of a fixed law. To claim an elite tier of verbal magnetism, you must master the mechanics of lexical ballast, developing the clinical capacity to completely liquidate qualifier friction from your interactive timeline. You must realize that true power in human communication does not belong to the individual who uses the most accommodating or descriptive language. True power belongs entirely to the operator whose words stand as absolute, self-contained monuments of fact. You completely stop treating your thoughts as flexible suggestions that require external endorsement, replacing that low-status reflex with a cold, minimalist approach to declarative speech. When you speak, you do not issue soft preambles or look for reassuring nods from the room. You state your mechanical conclusion cleanly, let it drop directly into the center of the arena with permanent structural finality, and instantly freeze your tongue, forcing the people across the table to accept the full mass of your premise without a single drop of conversational cushioning. This level of unyielding articulation requires the continuous execution of an internal operational script known as the declarative finality framework. Most people approach a high-pressure conversation with an anxious requirement to constantly monitor and repair the emotional comfort of the room, adding endless explanatory qualifiers to the end of their sentences to smooth over any perceived tension. A dangerously articulate operator completely eliminates this internal friction. Before you open your mouth to speak, you use your internal processing unit to run a savage linguistic audit on your thoughts, systematically extracting every single apologetic phrase, soft adverb, and defensive qualifier. When you release the remaining thought into the arena, it emerges as a pure, unfiltered statement of structural truth. You do not ask the room if they agree with your assessment, and you do not ask them if your explanation makes sense. You state your position with an absolute economy of force that confirms you are entirely unbothered by whether they have the capacity to understand it. When you operate from this paradigm of lexical ballast, your external communication style becomes completely stripped of the standard submissive markers that compromise the authority of the average corporate director. You completely eliminate the habit of over-explaining your pricing models, your implementation timelines, or your creative designs to win back a passing nod of approval from the target's frame. If a client, a partner, or a board member meets your statement with a skeptical question or an intense, challenging stare designed to test your boundaries, you do not flinch. You do not offer an unrequested discount or rush to slide a secondary presentation slide across the table to justify your worth. You look them directly in the eyes with a face that is a serene, unblinking mask of clinical calm and unbothered warmth, holding their gaze through the silence with an expression of detached curiosity until their defensive posture collapses under the weight of their own friction. Imagine an elite multi-ton automated deep-sea scientific research platform lowering a solid titanium drill assembly into the dense rocky floor of the Pacific Ocean at 4 a.m. The platform does not enter a state of high-friction panic, crying because the surrounding ocean currents are volatile, or attempting to bend its heavy metal alignment to please the shifting surface waves of the sea. It does not navigate with a desire for approval. It is engineered with a massive, unyielding underwater ballast system that anchors its center of gravity hundreds of feet below the surface, keeping its core stability locked into the structural laws of the Earth. The massive waves can slam against its hull, the howling windstorms can blast across its array, and the deep currents can pull at its chains, but the platform simply drives its titanium drills straight into the bedrock with absolute, fluid indifference, letting the ocean exhaust its kinetic fury, while its transmission systems continue to broadcast their coordinates to the global network with zero interruption. Your commercial channels, your premium consulting frameworks, and your long-term creative blueprints must be pushed through the human environment with that exact same ballast-locked velocity. Let me tell you about a man named Julian. Julian was an exceptionally sharp digital content strategist and independent systems architect who engineered automated monetization layouts multi-chapter script optimization grids, and custom high-contrast channel frameworks for elite educational documentary creators and multi-million subscriber media platforms across Europe. Julian was an undisputed grandmaster of digital asset optimization, commanding a premium $50,000 flat strategy retainer for his custom operational interventions, thumbnail dimension blueprints, and brand assets. Despite his flawless technical genius, early in his commercial trajectory, Julian's consulting firm hit a massive, exhausting bottleneck because his verbal delivery was heavily compromised by a chronic habit of qualifier friction. Whenever he stepped into a boardroom to pitch his optimization arrays to the elite managing partners of international media funds, his internal anxiety would trigger a submissive cushioning loop. He would flood his explanations with apologetic preambles, preface his pricing metrics with phrases like, "I was hoping this might work for your budget," and conclude every critical strategic pivot by anxiously asking the board, "Does that make sense, or should I change it?" The media executives, sensing his underlying requirement for reassurance, systematically weaponized his compliance loop against his agency. They would intentionally drop out of communication for weeks at a time, criticize his implementation timelines as overly aggressive, and demand that his team execute free preliminary audit workshops for months on end, just to watch Julian enter a state of frantic over-explanation and offer sudden unrequested discounts. Julian found himself caught in a state of absolute strategic exhaustion, constantly running around trying to manufacture the perfect, frictionless client experience to preserve his deals, while his independent enterprise remained completely frozen on the runway. One midnight, after a particularly exhausting corporate integration session where a prominent digital media founder had completely rejected his narrative restructuring blueprint because his presentation style felt hesitant and overly accommodating, Julian experienced an absolute internal paradigm shift. He sat in his creative studio, looked at his flawless structural data on his monitors, and realized that his own habit of using qualifiers was the literal open wound through which the market was draining his leverage and erasing his natural clarity. He realized he was the massive deep-sea research platform trying to apologize to the ocean currents instead of trusting its ballast. Right then, Julian executed a total, cold-blooded psychological demolition of his old communication patterns. He made an unbendable, non-negotiable pact with his own consciousness. He would entirely eliminate all qualifier friction, freeze his verbal delivery at the sharp geometry of declarative finality, and allow the market to either align with his terms or vanish from his horizon with zero friction. 3 months later, Julian walked into a top-floor executive boardroom in London to pitch his high-velocity media restructuring array to the chief executive officer of a massive, multi-billion-dollar international television and digital broadcasting syndicate. The CEO, a ruthless, highly calculated media tycoon named Sterling, who was legendary for breaking outside consultancies through aggressive mind games, sudden corporate coldness, and calculated silence, leaned back in his leather chair, tossed Julian's premium proposal into the trash bin in front of the entire board, and smiled coldly. "Julian, your optimization theory is far too disruptive for our current network architecture, and your $50,000 fee is an absolute joke. We will offer you 30% of that number to run a small regional test, and we require your team to surrender the proprietary source code of your thumbnail dimension algorithms before we sign. If you don't like it, the door is directly behind you, and we will delete your application from our database permanently." The junior developers on Julian's team instantly panicked, their faces turning pale as they leaned forward to scramble for their laptops to offer a high-pitched, qualified explanation to salvage the relationship. Julian did not flinch. He did not shift his posture. He did not look at the trash bin, and he did not allow a single flash of defensive agitation to cross his face. His countenance remained a pristine, perfectly serene mask of absolute, unbothered detachment and clinical warmth. He sat in complete, motionless stillness for 6 full seconds, allowing the heavy psychological vacuum to expand until the CEO's arrogant smirk began to freeze into a state of nervous confusion. Julian looked Sterling directly in the eyes with an expression of calm, clinical detachment, and spoke with a measured, perfectly regulated verbal tempo, that confirmed he was entirely prepared to let them walk off his board without a single drop of emotional friction or conversational qualification. Sterling, your desire to preserve your network's current architecture is a perfectly valid risk mitigation choice for your enterprise. My licensing fee and algorithm parameters are already finalized. They are fixed structural constants of my operation and are not subject to external modification or emotional negotiation. If this syndicate currently lacks the operational stamina to integrate at this tier of velocity, it is entirely fine. I will close this allocation window right now, retrieve my team, and route our processing capacity to our European pipelines. I wish you absolute success with your regional test. He did not look for an opening to argue. He did not offer a single presentation slide, and he did not wait for a counter-proposal. He calmly closed his laptop, placed it into his leather briefcase, stood up, and turned toward the door with the absolute, terrifying momentum of an operator who had already let them walk away inside his own mind. The sudden, absolute presence of permanent finality and zero qualifiers from Julian completely shattered the tycoon's entire practice dominance script. By completely refusing to enter his argumentative loop, fight for the deal, or show a single micro-signal of panic, Julian's serene detachment forced the CEO's primitive survival mechanism to make an immediate, frantic calculation. They realized in a flash of raw panic that they were not dealing with an eager contractor begging for an assignment, but with an elite sovereign operator who knew with absolute finality that his technology was irreplaceable and was fully prepared to let their multi-billion-dollar syndicate vanish from his timeline forever. The tycoon's confrontational, mocking facade completely dissolved into nothingness. He jumped up from his seat, raised his hands in a gesture of immediate, frantic compromise, and called out, "Julian, wait. Please, sit down. There's no need to take our corporate due diligence so drastically. We were simply testing the structural resilience of your framework. We can absolutely accommodate your original $50,000 flat retainer fee and preserve your algorithm encryption boundaries. Let's execute the full contract framework right now." The original contract was signed and authorized within 15 minutes, completely free of any structural deductions. Julian had successfully weaponized his absolute internal indifference and declarative clarity to achieve total commercial dominance over the terrain, becoming an absolute magnet for their capital simply by proving he did not need their validation to survive. The definitive lesson Julian's framework teaches is that true human magnetism is never built by attempting to soften your words for the chessboard across from you. It is built by completely eliminating your own internal requirement to play the game. The moment you step into a professional or personal environment with a mind that has thoroughly liquidated the compulsion to use qualifiers and anchored its coordinates behind the wall of declarative finality, you possess an invisible, predatory leverage over every asset in the room. You stop overthinking the variable matrix, you stop chasing the validation of human critics, and you stop allowing the volatile anxieties of external actors to drift your ship from its designed course. You become an unyielding force of strategic nature, an absolute law of geometry that the external world must naturally move toward to find its own balance, allowing your individual empire to compound in the dark with permanent sovereignty, absolute speed, and total, unshakable freedom. Chapter 8. The Dynamic of Cognitive Dominance, Intercepting Conversational Frames. The foundational psychological trap that destroys the interpersonal leverage and erases the articulate authority of the average operator is the submissive habit of adopting the client's conversational frame. We live in a highly transactional, aggressive economic marketplace that continuously trains the individual to prioritize customer compliance over professional sovereignty. When an independent creator, a corporate executive, or a strategic consultant steps into an important partnership alignment or a premium commercial negotiation, their analytical processor typically commits a critical structural error. They allow the person across the table to dictate the rules, the vocabulary, and the psychological parameters of the exchange. They tell themselves that, to secure the client or win the contract, they must operate within the timeline, the budget assumptions, and the historical reference points provided by the buyer, treating the target's worldview as the definitive boundary of reality. This internal capitulation is an absolute strategic disaster for your clarity and leverage. The moment you enter an interaction operating within another person's frame, you hand them an invisible, predatory leverage that allows them to cut your profit margins, violate your operational boundaries, and treat your presence like a cheap, expendable commodity. True articulation operates on the strict laws of cognitive dominance. The individual with the strongest, most stable, and most unyielding frame will naturally absorb the weaker frame into their orbit. When you spend your emotional energy trying to dance within the parameters established by a client, you signal to their primitive survival mechanism that your foundation is fragile, your presence is reactive, and your expertise is an illusion. The crowd does not gravitate toward the flexible service provider who bends their reality to fit the buyer's anxiety. They gravitate with near-hypnotic reverence toward the sovereign operator who possesses the absolute cold-blooded internal stamina to establish their own frame as an unbendable law of nature. To unlock a dangerous, supreme tier of human magnetism, you must master the dynamic of cognitive dominance, developing the clinical capacity to systematically intercept and reconstruct external conversational frames. You must realize that a client's initial objections, historical complaints, or aggressive budget limits are never objective boundaries to be negotiated. They are merely loose, unorganized fields of environmental feedback that expose their specific operational limitations. A dangerously articulate operator does not enter an argumentative loop to fight against the client's frame. You calmly, silently bypass it entirely, using your voice to overlay the interaction with an independent, high-density structural reality. When the target attempts to shift your coordinates or impose their anxieties on your timeline, you do not launch into a defensive explanation. You look them directly in the eyes with a face that is a serene mask of clinical calm and unbothered warmth. Deliver a brief, high-velocity premium reframe that exposes the structural flaws in their baseline and force them to step onto your terrain to continue the conversation. This unassailable stature requires the continuous implementation of an internal operational script known as the structural reframing protocol. Most people approach a commercial negotiation with a posture of compliance, believing that if they just accept the client's vocabulary and historical reference points, they can secure the contract and fix the relationship dynamics later. A sovereign operator completely demolishes this illusion. You realize that a client who attempts to dictate your operational methods or control your pricing frame before the contract is even signed will systematically sabotage your velocity for the entire life cycle of the project. You treat their initial frame enforcement not as a challenge to be answered through submissive pleading, but as an absolute data point that maps their current strategic blindness. You do not try to fix their worldview through argument. You state your operational parameters with absolute finality, framing your expertise as a rare, premium, and completely irreplaceable asset that operates entirely on its own immutable laws of geometry. When you operate from this paradigm of cognitive dominance, your external physical and verbal presentation undergoes a clean transformation that completely paralyzes the standard manipulation mechanisms of the marketplace. Because your nervous system is entirely empty of the friction of neediness, your baseline remains a pristine, unreadable mask of absolute smiling detachment and clinical warmth. You completely eliminate all submissive conversational microsignals, such as the rapid explanatory tangents, the defensive presentation slides, and the hurried compromises engineered to rescue a failing negotiation. If a buyer states that your $75,000 custom media architecture is too expensive and attempts to force you into a lower-tier pricing framework, you do not move a single muscle to block their exit or justify your numbers. You look them directly in the eyes, offer a slow, genuine nod of unbothered validation, and speak with a measured, perfectly regulated verbal tempo that confirms you are entirely prepared to let them walk off your board without a single drop of internal friction. Imagine an elite, state-of-the-art international cargo hovercraft gliding across a vast, treacherous, shallow marshland at 3 a.m. The hovercraft does not throw out heavy steel anchors into the mud, tie itself to the rotten wooden posts of the swamp docks, or pray that the local marsh merchants give it permission to slide through their shallow waters. It does not navigate with anchorage or accommodate the terrain's limitations. It operates on a massive, high-powered cushion of pressurized air that hovers its entire multi-ton structural hull completely above the environment, allowing it to glide across deep water, thick mud, and jagged rocks with the exact same frictionless, high-velocity momentum. If a local dockmaster attempts to block its path or demands an extortionate transit fee, the hovercraft doesn't enter an argumentative loop. It simply rotates its massive propulsion fans, rises 3 feet above the boundary, and blasts past their position into the open sea at 80 knots, completely unaffected by the environment it left behind. Your creative platforms, your proprietary script architectures, and your premium advisory retainers must be piloted through the marketplace with that exact same hover-locked velocity. Let me tell you about a woman named Helena. Helena was an exceptionally sharp, independent digital media strategist and visual brand master who engineered high-velocity monetization frameworks, script optimization layouts, and custom thumbnail aspect ratios for elite multi-chapter educational documentary channels and corporate longevity platforms across North America. Helena was an undisputed master of digital asset branding, commanding a premium $50,000 flat strategy retainer for her custom structural interventions. Despite her flawless technical and narrative competence, early in her corporate trajectory, her agency's expansion hit a massive operational bottleneck because her nervous system was heavily compromised by a fear of losing high-profile clients, making her intensely vulnerable to their tactical frame shifts during the closing phases of a deal. This structural vulnerability was catastrophically exploited during a high-stakes alignment session with the chief executive officer of a massive, multinational digital entertainment conglomerate that was looking to launch a high-density, multi-chapter health and longevity video channel. The CEO, a powerful, highly charismatic media tycoon named Vance, who was masterfully skilled at using charm, high-energy flattery, and sudden environmental intimidation to extract free intelligence and enforce forced frame reductions on hungry contractors, leaned across the table during a private dinner in Aspen, slammed his hand down, and attempted to completely rewrite Helena's operational boundaries to force a 40% fee cut. Helena, your reputation in the digital documentary space is absolutely legendary, but your $50,000 flat retainer fee is simply too steep for our initial phase. We have decided to modify the terms. We will pay you $20,000 for the full strategy rollout, and we require your team to provide round-the-clock uncompensated algorithmic adjustments for the next 12 months. Sign the modified framework right now, or we will take our multi-million-dollar production budget straight to your closest competitor down the street. Don't let your pride ruin a massive corporate opportunity. The junior associates at the table turned pale, looking at Helena with absolute panic, fully expecting her to cave into his demands, lower her fee, and launch into a frantic defense of her data models to save the deal. Helena did not move a single finger to defend herself. Her face remained a perfectly serene, pristine mask of clinical, unbothered warmth, her eyes shining with an absolute, detached composure. She did not open her briefcase. She did not reveal a single project title, and she did not utter a single word of frantic counter-negotiation. She sat in absolute, motionless stillness for 4 full seconds, let her breath settle into a slow, rhythmic bass line, and spoke with an incredible, quiet, and perfectly regulated verbal cadence that radiated absolute, unbendable sovereignty and zero-frame accommodation. Vance, your desire to optimize your initial phase budget is an entirely reasonable financial choice for your conglomerate. I completely respect your path. My strategy retainer is fixed at $50,000, and my operational boundaries are non-negotiable parameters engineered to preserve the structural velocity of our media arrays. Because these coordinates are fixed constants of my enterprise, they are not subject to external revision or transactional compromise. It is completely clear to me that our operational systems currently lack the alignment required to execute a sustainable partnership. I will close this allocation window right now and permanently withdraw our proposal from your ecosystem. Thank you for an exceptional dinner. The steak was truly remarkable. She smiled warmly, took a slow sip of her mineral water, and completely dropped her informational presence to absolute zero. She did not look for his approval. She did not wait for a counter-proposal. and she did not give him a secondary chance to test her frame. She calmly stood up, picked up her leather briefcase, and turned toward the door with the absolute, terrifying momentum of an operator who had already walked away from the deal inside her own mind. The psychological impact of this clean, unyielding execution of cognitive dominance hit the billionaire media tycoon like an absolute physical shockwave. He had spent his entire career dealing with eager, desperate agency founders who would gladly strip their operations naked, accept humiliating frame reductions, and hand over all their intellectual property for free just to win a nod of approval from his massive capital scale. The sudden freezing realization that Helena had completely sealed her perimeters and walked away from his multi-million-dollar budget within 60 seconds, without a single flash of fear, hesitation, or defensive pleading, completely upended his practiced dominance script. He realized in a flash of raw cognitive dissonance that he was dealing with an elite, untouchable commander whose structural discipline was absolute and whose intellectual capital was a high-tier commodity that could not be manipulated, intimidated, or bought with cheap flattery. The tycoon's condescending, extracting facade completely dissolved into nothingness. He jumped up from his seat, raised his hands in a frantic gesture of immediate, absolute compromise, and shouted with genuine admiration, "Helena, wait, please, sit back down. There's no need to take our due diligence so drastically. You are an absolute class act and a phenomenal operator. You protect your perimeters like a sovereign nation. We will completely withdraw our modifications, honor your full $50,000 flat retainer fee, and respect your operational boundaries down to the exact letter. Let's sign the original framework right now." The original contract was executed and signed within 10 minutes, completely free of any structural concessions. Helena had successfully transformed her absolute willingness to protect her cognitive frame into complete commercial dominance over the terrain, becoming an absolute magnet for his respect, simply by proving she was entirely untouchable. The definitive lesson Helena's architecture teaches is that dangerously confident operators are never recognized by what they broadcast to the crowd. They are recognized entirely by the absolute, unyielding discipline with which they maintain their own cognitive frame against external pressure. The moment you step into the professional or personal marketplace with a mind that has completely liquidated the compulsion to secure a specific alignment and fully anchored itself in the pristine power of the walkaway, you possess an invisible, permanent leverage over every asset in your orbit. You stop hunting for the environment's validation, you stop over-explaining your worth, and you stop allowing the loose, hyper-expressive noise of external actors to drain your operational leverage. You become an impenetrable psychological fortress, allowing your individual empire to compound in the dark, with permanent sovereignty, absolute speed, and total unshakable freedom. Chapter 9. The Tactical Deconstruction of Query Fields, Navigating Hostile Interrogation. The operational vulnerability that most frequently dissolves the articulate presence of the average executive is the submissive habit of treating questions as moral interrogations. We operate within a highly competitive corporate and social architecture where conversational assets are frequently weaponized by adversarial actors to expose structural vulnerabilities, force defensive positioning, or fracture an operator's internal equilibrium. When a professional steps into a high-stakes shareholder review, a premium project audit, or a volatile public media appearance, their primitive evolutionary defense center typically commits a catastrophic strategic error. It treats a sharp, critical query as a personal crisis. They tighten their vocal perimeters, shift their physical posture, and launch into an immediate, high-pitched defensive cascade, racing to provide an exhaustive validation of their methods to pacify the interrogator. This hyper-reactive positioning is an absolute disaster for your strategic leverage. The moment you rush to answer a hostile query on the terms established by the interrogator, you directly validate their right to put you on trial, signaling to every sharp observer in the arena that your foundation is porous and your confidence is dependent on external compliance. True articulation requires the absolute liquidation of this defensive reflex. You must develop the clinical capacity to perform a complete tactical deconstruction of incoming query fields. You must realize that an aggressive question is never an objective search for truth. It is merely a high-velocity stream of kinetic energy engineered to shift your coordinates and pull you off your center of gravity. A dangerously confident operator does not absorb this energy. You pass it through a sterile, analytical filter that strips the query of its emotional charge, allowing you to deconstruct its underlying assumptions with total clinical detachment. To unlock a supreme tier of communicative dominance, you must implement an interpersonal framework known as query field neutralization. When an adversarial actor launches a sharp, double-edged question designed to trap your authority or expose a metric drop, you do not flinch, you do not offer an explanatory tangent, and you do not apologize for your trajectory. You let your face remain a serene, unreadable mask of absolute, frozen calm and unbothered warmth. You let a heavy, perfectly timed vacuum of silence hang in the air for 2 or 3 full seconds, forcing the room to experience the absolute weight of your composure before you choose to open your mouth. When you speak, your voice emerges from the deep resonant center of your diaphragm, maintaining an incredible, slow, and perfectly regulated verbal cadence that refuses to validate the trap, slicing through the premise of the question to expose the structural limitations of the person asking it. This unassailable stature requires the continuous execution of an internal operational script known as the premises inversion protocol. Most people approach a difficult corporate interrogation with a mind that is actively hyperventilating, accepting the negative labels and historical constraints embedded within the query to rush toward an answer that will restore their comfort. A sovereign operator completely liquidates this friction. When a hostile asset asks, "Why has your team failed to meet our initial launch timeline?" you do not accept the word "failed" as a metric of reality. You sit comfortably back into your own skin, analyze their resistance with the quiet interest of a clinical auditor, and intercept the frame cleanly, saying, "The timeline adjustments you are labeling as a failure are a deliberate high-velocity quality assurance freeze, engineered to protect your network from audience attrition." By formatting your response into a sharp, geometric core premise, you instantly strip the interrogator of their leverage, forcing them to retreat into a state of intense cognitive confusion. When you navigate through query fields with this level of pristine, minimalist design, your external presentation completely paralyzes the standard manipulation mechanisms of the marketplace. You completely eliminate the use of tentative filler phrases or hurried submissive qualifiers designed to smooth over the tension. If a buyer, an investor, or a board member attempts to trap you with a binary choice designed to force a compromise, you do not play within their matrix. You look them directly in the eyes with a slow, genuine smile of absolute detachment, deliver a brief, high-density 2-sentence reframe that establishes an independent standard of truth, and let your absolute silence lock back into the room like an absolute iron vault. This complete lack of verbal friction signals to their survival mechanisms that your operational frameworks are fixed constants of reality that cannot be manipulated by conversational games, transforming you into an unassailable gravity well that the room must accommodate. Imagine a massive, high-performance automated concrete barrier standing directly at the center of a dense, high-speed automotive testing track at 3 km. The barrier does not enter a state of high-friction panic, crying because a small, lightweight fiberglass testing car is speeding down the lane at 90 miles per hour, directly toward its position. It does not look at the oncoming vehicle and ask itself if its design is flawed, or if it should move 2 inches to the left to smooth over the impact. It does not navigate with emotional attachment or structural reactivity. It simply stands in a state of absolute, unyielding density, mass, and pristine stone silence, allowing the vehicle to slam against its reinforced surface, shatter its fiberglass shell into 1,000 harmless pieces, and exhaust its kinetic energy against its unmoving granite frame. The barrier doesn't chase the vehicle. Its sheer, unyielding weight forces the entire environment to naturally, effortlessly find its limit against its perimeter. Your creative blueprints, your corporate consulting retainers, and your long-form media profiles must be pushed through the marketplace with that exact same barrier-locked mass. Let me tell you about a man named Christian. Christian was an exceptionally sharp digital content strategist and narrative operations architect who spent his career engineering high-density monetization frameworks, multi-chapter script optimization grids, and custom high-contrast visual layouts for elite executive longevity platforms and venture-backed educational creators across North America. Christian was an absolute master of human behavioral systems, commanding a premium $50,000 flat strategy retainer for his custom operational interventions and channel asset designs. Despite his flawless technical competence, early in his commercial path, Christian's firm hit a massive bottleneck because his verbal delivery was heavily compromised by an anxious reactivity during high-stress corporate audits. Whenever an international investor or a senior board executive threw a sharp, aggressive question at his data models during a review session, Christian's nervous system would enter a state of fight-or-flight hyperventilation. He would speak at a frantic, high-pitched tempo, rushing his explanations to justify his choices and stacking unnecessary adjectives onto his core points to protect his ego from exposure. The corporate gatekeepers, sensing his underlying vulnerability and intense need for validation, masterfully weaponized his query reactivity against his agency. They would intentionally deliver cold, critical questions during high-stakes board updates, criticize his implementation schedules as excessive, and demand that his team execute free preliminary workshops for months just to watch Christian enter a state of frantic over-explanation. Christian found himself trapped in a state of absolute strategic exhaustion, constantly running around trying to repair his identity to please the volatile moods of corporate tyrants, while his independent enterprise remained completely frozen on the runway. One midnight, after a particularly exhausting audit session where a major healthcare founder had completely rejected his narrative restructuring deck because Christian had looked defensive and overreactive under cross-examination, Christian experienced an absolute internal awakening. He sat in his empty office looking at his flawless structural data and realized that his own habit of personalizing their queries was the literal open wound through which the market was draining his leverage and erasing his natural magnetism. He realized he was the concrete barrier trying to apologize to the fiberglass car instead of filtering its impact through the matrix. Right then, Christian executed a total, permanent liquidation of his query reflex. He made an unbendable, non-negotiable pact with his own consciousness. He would entirely eliminate the requirement to satisfy the interrogator's frame, freeze his internal processing unit behind the wall of query deconstruction, and treat every aggressive question not as a crisis, but as a neutral mirror that exposes the buyer's limitations. 3 months later, Christian walked into a top-floor executive boardroom in Chicago to defend his high-velocity media restructuring program before the senior leadership team of a massive, multi-billion-dollar international corporate wellness network. The review panel was commanded by a senior vice president named Reginald, a brutal, highly calculated corporate operator who had spent 30 years breaking outside consultancies through aggressive mind games, sudden corporate coldness, and a calculated display of overwhelming institutional power to force massive fee cuts. During the session, Reginald leaned back in his leather chair, slammed Christian's premium $50,000 contract deck onto his elevated desk, and launched a fierce, meticulously calculated verbal assault designed to shatter his authority in front of the entire international board. Christian, we've just reviewed your automated narrative optimization metrics from this morning, and frankly, my division has concluded that your agency is an absolute fraud. Your implementation timeline has disrupted our entire marketing sector, and our primary video platforms have experienced a sudden 5% fluctuation in engagement. Why should this board not throw your team out of this building right now and sue your agency for professional malpractice? The junior associates on Christian's team instantly panicked, their faces turning pale as they leaned forward to scramble for an explanation to save the contract. Christian did not move a single muscle. He did not shift his posture, he did not look at the contract deck, and he did not show a single micro-expression of defensive agitation. His countenance remained a pristine, perfectly serene mask of absolute, clinical calm and unbothered warmth. He sat in complete, motionless stillness for 5 full seconds, letting the heavy psychological vacuum expand, until Reginald's arrogant smirk began to freeze into a state of nervous confusion. Christian looked Reginald directly in the eyes with an expression of calm, smiling indifference, and spoke with an incredible, slow, and perfectly regulated verbal tempo that radiated pure sovereign authority and deep-sea isolation. "Reginald, your fierce passion for preserving this network's launch velocity is an entirely appropriate and invaluable leadership orientation for this board. The sudden 5% fluctuation you have just highlighted across the video platforms is an entirely predictable, temporary caching anomaly generated by our automated data pipeline migrations this morning. It is a neutral, short-term system behavior that will fully self-correct within the next 12 hours. You do not need to weaponize malpractice framing to protect your quarterly metrics. My enterprise compounds independently. The real question I am auditing today is whether this leadership board possesses the internal stamina and the structural discipline required to ride through a standard 12-hour engineering migration without retreating into old, low-velocity panic loops. Let's bypass the theatrical shouting and keep our eyes locked on the macro retention data." He did not look for an opening to argue, he did not offer a single presentation slide, and he did not wait for a counter-proposal. He calmly sat back comfortably, interlocked his fingers, and let his absolute silence lock back into the room like an absolute iron vault. The sudden, total absence of panic or defensive pleading from Christian completely upended the vice president's entire practice dominant script. By completely refusing to personalize the query, fight for the deal, or show a single micro-signal of hesitation, Christian's serene detachment forced Reginald's primitive survival mechanism to make an immediate, frantic calculation. The board realized in a flash of raw panic that they were not dealing with a desperate vendor begging for an assignment, but with an elite, sovereign operator who knew with absolute finality that his technology was irreplaceable and was fully prepared to let their multi-billion-dollar network vanish from his timeline forever. The vice president's confrontational, mocking facade completely collapsed into nothingness. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, cleared his throat nervously, and looked out the window. "Christian, look, there's no need to take our corporate due diligence so drastically. We simply had to complete our internal verification. We can absolutely accommodate your original $50,000 flat retainer fee and protect your structural implementation boundaries down to the exact letter. Let's execute the full contract framework right now." The original contract was signed and authorized within 10 minutes, completely free of any structural concessions. Christian had successfully transformed his absolute internal filter into complete commercial dominance over the terrain, becoming an absolute magnet for their capital, simply by proving he was entirely undisturbed by their hostile queries. The definitive lesson Christian's architecture teaches is that true human magnetism is never built by attempting to satisfy the aggressive questions of the market. It is built by completely eliminating your own internal requirement to justify your worth. The moment you step into a professional or personal environment with a mind that has thoroughly liquidated the compulsion to answer a hostile query on the target's terms and anchored its coordinates behind the wall of query deconstruction, you possess an invisible, permanent leverage over every asset in the room. You stop overthinking the variable matrix. You stop chasing after the fleeting validation of human critics, and you stop allowing the volatile anxieties of external actors to alter your designed course. You become an unyielding force of strategic nature, an absolute law of geometry that the external world must naturally move toward to find its own balance, allowing your individual empire to compound in the dark with permanent sovereignty, absolute speed, and total, unshakable freedom. Chapter 10: The Elimination of Interactive Echoes, Overcoming Social Validation Hunting. The core systemic vulnerability that destroys the communicative clarity and erases the magnetic authority of the average operator is the subconscious habit of validation hunting. We operate within a highly fragmented, attention-addicted social environment that conditions the individual to continuously look for immediate positive reinforcement during conversational loops. When an independent creator, an enterprise leader, or a media strategist steps into a key partnership pitch or an internal executive review, their nervous system typically seeks a series of micro-validation signals from the target. They check the listener's eyes for a nod of approval, elevate their vocal pitch to sound more agreeable, and introduce short, reactive phrases to confirm compliance. They engage in a process of verbal mirroring, constantly tailoring their sentences, their tone, and their timing to match the shifting moods and expectations of the people around them. This conversational echo effect is an absolute catastrophe for your sovereign positioning. The human brain possesses an ancient evolutionary processor that continuously scans the communication environment for subtle indicators of internal status, safety, and structural containment. The moment you alter your baseline delivery to match the emotional frequency of a room, or check the target's face for reassurance after delivering a core point, you signal to every sharp observer in your orbit that you are operating from a position of chronic underlying scarcity. You betray a deep-seated fear that your value is an illusion that requires immediate external endorsement to remain valid. The marketplace does not respect or remember the echo that twists its reality to fit the buyer's comfort. The crowd is drawn with near-religious intensity to the non-reactive operator, the individual who maintains a completely flat, serene, and immovable internal equilibrium that remains entirely independent of whether the room validates their frequency. To claim an elite tier of verbal magnetism, you must master the complete elimination of interactive echoes, developing the clinical capacity to broadcast your concepts with an absolute indifference to external reinforcement. You must realize that true articulation is never an act of social coordination. It is the natural consequence of establishing absolute control over the perimeters of your own consciousness. A dangerously confident operator does not look for immediate agreement, smiles or nods from the room when delivering a premium pricing framework or a non-negotiable strategic boundary. You treat your words as fixed laws of physics that are issued with permanent finality. You drop your thesis directly into the center of the arena with a face that is a serene, unreadable mask of clinical calm and unbothered warmth, keeping your posture completely still and your tongue completely frozen, forcing the external environment to adjust its metrics around your unmoving granite frame. This unassailable stature requires the continuous execution of an interpersonal protocol known as independent frequency broadcasting. Most people approach a high-stakes conversation with an anxious requirement to smooth over every point of friction, twisting their delivery, accelerating their tempo, or adding defensive qualifiers the millisecond they detect a hint of coldness or resistance from the listener. A sovereign operator completely liquidates this internal friction. When you step into a room, you select a low, rich, and perfectly centered vocal register and anchor your entire consciousness into that specific tone with absolute finality. You speak with a heavy downward deflection at the conclusion of every strategic premise, ensuring that your sentences land with the definitive finality of a closing statement, rather than the anxious pleading of a question. You do not look for immediate feedback. You do not nod your head in agreement with their doubts, and you do not allow their cold posturing to alter your designed cadence. When you execute this architectural inversion, you completely upend the psychological leverage of the interaction, inducing a state of intense cognitive vertigo within the target's nervous system. High-status actors, corporate tyrants, and social gatekeepers operate on the explicit expectation of submissive verbal echoes. Their primitive minds require you to act like an anxious applicant to complete their practiced dominance routine. However, when you meet their environmental pressure with a slow, heavy, and resonant vocal tone that remains completely independent of their presence, you completely shatter their dominant script. They realize in a flash of raw survival instinct that they are no longer dealing with a desperate vendor trying to impress them, but with an elite peer of immense structural power. Finding no defensive wall to slam into, their arrogance completely collapses, forcing their ego to immediately retreat into a state of intense confusion, deference, and a desperate desire to win your validation. Imagine an elite, state-of-the-art international nuclear submarine navigating through a violent, catastrophic hurricane across the dark waters of the North Atlantic at 4 a.m. On the surface of the ocean, the world is a chaotic hellscape of howling 90-knot winds, blinding torrential rain, and massive 60-foot crushing waves that are systematically destroying every civilian shipping vessel and low-leverage fishing boat in the zone. The submarine does not enter a state of high-friction panic, crying because the surface of the sea is in a state of absolute turmoil, or attempting to fire its weapons at the clouds to force the storm to calm down. It does not navigate with surface reactivity or look for validation from the waves. It drops down 400 feet into the deep, freezing, black abyssal zone of the ocean floor, where the water is completely motionless, silent, and entirely undisturbed by the atmospheric chaos above. It activates its highly advanced, passive automated sensors, maintaining its designed course at 30 knots with absolute mechanical safety and mathematical precision. Your commercial channels, your premium advisory retainers, and your long-term creative blueprints must be piloted through the human marketplace with that exact same deep-sea velocity. Let me tell you about a woman named Alexandra. Alexandra was an exceptionally brilliant media production strategist and enterprise digital systems director who specialized in engineering high-velocity communication architectures, long-form narrative content frameworks, and automated brand assets for elite multi-billion-dollar international healthcare conglomerates and medical technology networks across North America. Alexandra was an absolute master of her craft, commanding a premium $50,000 flat strategy retainer for her custom structural interventions, layout optimizations, and custom thumbnail aspect ratios. Despite her flawless technical competence, early in her corporate path, Alexandra's commercial expansion hit a massive bottleneck because her nervous system was heavily compromised by an interactive echo reflex. Whenever she stepped into a strategy meeting to pitch her optimization arrays to the senior executives of global healthcare networks, her internal anxiety would trigger a validation hunting loop. She would constantly look at the executives' faces to see if they were nodding, accelerate her verbal tempo to match their fast-paced energy, and use soft verbal fillers to confirm her alignment with their views. The medical executives, sensing her underlying vulnerability and intense sensitivity to their feedback, masterfully weaponized her echo reflex to exploit her agency. They would intentionally deliver cold, blank stares during high-stakes board reviews, criticize her implementation timelines as overly theoretical, and demand that her team execute free preliminary audit workshops for months just to watch Alexandra enter a state of frantic over-explanation and offer sudden unrequested concessions. Alexandra found herself trapped in a state of absolute strategic exhaustion, constantly running around trying to fix her delivery to win their temporary approval, while her independent enterprise remained completely stalled on the runway. One midnight, after discovering that a senior vice president of a global healthcare network had completely cancelled a multi-chapter video channel rollout because Alexandra had looked flustered and overly eager to please during a tense quarterly board review, Alexandra experienced an absolute internal awakening. She sat in her creative studio, looked at her flawless structural blueprints on her monitors, and realized that her own habit of validation hunting was the literal open wound through which the market was draining her leverage and erasing her natural magnetism. She realized she was the nuclear submarine trying to apologize to the hurricane on the surface, instead of dropping into the silent deep. Right then, Alexandra executed a total, permanent liquidation of her echo reflex. She made an unbendable, non-negotiable pact with his own consciousness. She would entirely eliminate all reactive feedback, freeze her internal processing unit at a state of absolute finality, and meet the volatile noise of the marketplace with a perfectly calibrated independent frequency broadcasting loop. 6 months later, Alexandra was called into an extraordinary executive board meeting in Chicago to defend her high-velocity media restructuring program before the chief executive officer of a massive, multi-billion-dollar international medical syndicate that was suffering from systemic audience attrition. The CEO, a ruthless, highly calculated corporate tyrant named Dr. Vance, who was legendary for breaking outside consultancies through aggressive public humiliations, sarcastic interruptions, and a calculated display of overwhelming emotional pressure, slammed his heavy folder down on his elevated desk, stared at Alexandra with an expression of cold fury, and launched a fierce, meticulously calculated verbal assault designed to shatter her authority in front of the entire international leadership team. Alexandra, I've just reviewed your automated narrative optimization metrics, and frankly, I find your digital formatting theories to be an absolute fraud and a waste of corporate capital. Your implementation timeline has disrupted our entire marketing sector, and our primary video platforms have experienced a sudden 5% drop in engagement this morning. You have completely ruined our quarterly launch velocity. Why should I not throw your team out of this building right now and sue your agency for professional malpractice? The junior associates from Alexandra's team instantly froze, their faces turning pale as they leaned forward to scramble for an explanation to save their reputations. Alexandra did not move an inch. She did not tighten her jaw. Her hands rested completely motionless on the glass boardroom table, and she did not show a single micro-signal of defensive agitation or validation hunting. Her countenance remained a pristine, perfectly serene mask of absolute, frozen calm and clinical warmth. She stood in absolute, motionless silence for 5 full seconds after Dr. Vance finished his tirade, letting the echo of his aggressive shouts fade completely into the vast room until the air felt heavy with awkward psychological tension. She did not allow a single flash of fear or reactive panic to touch her conscious processor, and she did not check his face for approval. She looked directly at Dr. Vance with an expression of calm, unbothered warmth, and spoke with an incredible, slow, and perfectly regulated verbal cadence that radiated pure sovereign authority and deep-sea isolation. Dr. Vance, your fierce passion for preserving this syndicate's launch velocity is an entirely appropriate and invaluable leadership orientation for this board. The sudden 5% fluctuation you have just highlighted across the video platforms is an entirely predictable, temporary caching anomaly generated by our automated data pipeline migrations this morning. It is a neutral, short-term system behavior that will fully self-correct within the next 12 hours. You do not need to weaponize malpractice framing to protect your quarterly metrics. My enterprise compounds independently. The real question I am auditing today is whether this leadership board possesses the internal stamina and the structural discipline required to ride through a standard 12-hour engineering migration without retreating into old, low-velocity panic loops. Let's bypass the theatrical shouting and keep our eyes locked on the macro retention data. The psychological impact of this clean, non-reactive deconstruction hit the corporate tyrant like an absolute physical impact. By completely absorbing his raw anger, refusing to offer a single reactive microsignal or validation echo, and seamlessly transforming his venomous attack into a valuable stream of neutral operational data, Alexandra had instantly stripped him of his entire adversarial leverage. Dr. Vance could no longer play the role of the brave corporate titan breaking a weak contractor. If he continued to shout now, he would simply look like an irrational, emotionally unstable executive, disrupting a collaborative engineering session. The psychological vertigo hit his nervous system instantly. His face turned bright red, his aggressive posture completely collapsed, and he sat back down in his elevated chair, staring blankly at his folder in absolute silence. For the rest of the meeting, Alexandra proceeded to walk through her restructuring cuts with absolute precision, while the CEO sat entirely neutralized, nodding along like a quiet student. Alexandra had successfully turned a public execution attempt into the ultimate demonstration of her untouchable, non-reactive command, becoming an absolute magnet for the board's respect simply by refusing to echo the noise. The definitive lesson Alexandra's framework teaches is that dangerous confidence is never achieved by trying to control the emotional outputs of your opponents. It is achieved by exercising absolute, unyielding control over the perimeters of your own consciousness. The moment you step into the marketplace with a mind that has thoroughly liquidated interactive echoes and anchored its coordinates behind a perfectly calibrated independent frequency loop, you become entirely untouchable. You stop overthinking the volatile noise of human critique, you stop defending your pride with friction, and you stop allowing the aggressive posturing of external assets to alter your designed coordinate. You become a sovereign, clinical diagnostic lens, allowing your individual empire to compound in the dark, with absolute speed, total precision, and permanent, unshakable freedom.